The rain lashed against the lone figure as she ran through the darkness. Her once elegant dress now hung in tatters, caked with mud, and soaked through to her skin. Lightning split the sky, illuminating her path for the briefest moment, just enough for her to see the hoofprints washing away beneath her feet. The sound of horses somewhere behind her pushed her forward, despite the pain shooting through her ankle. Rebecca Caldwell clutched the silver locket around her neck as she stumbled down the muddy path. Her lungs burned with each desperate breath, but she couldn't stop. Not now, not when she had come so far. Another flash of lightning revealed a distant light through the curtain of rain, a warm, steady glow that promised shelter. With renewed determination, she forced herself toward it, each step a battle against the storm and her failing strength. The ground beneath her suddenly gave way. Rebecca cried out as she tumbled down a small embankment, landing hard on her side. Pain shot through her ribs, and for a moment darkness threatened to overtake her vision. She lay there, the cold mud seeping into her clothes, the rain pounding her face. "Get up," she whispered to herself. "Mother didn't raise you to surrender." With trembling arms, she pushed herself to her feet. The light was closer now, a lantern and a window. A house, a chance. Her ankle throbbed with each step, but the distant sound of horses spurred her forward. One final push through the storm. One last chance at freedom. Nathan Morgan wiped the rain from his eyes as he secured the last patch on his leaking roof. At 38, he was still strong and capable, his years as a cavalry soldier during the war between the states having hardened him in ways both visible and invisible. The storm had caught him by surprise, turning what should have been a simple repair into a battle against the elements. Horizon Ranch was his kingdom, 1,000 acres of Wyoming territory that most folks had written off as worthless. But Nathan had seen potential where others saw only hardship. 10 years of backbreaking work had transformed the land, proving those naysayers wrong. Yet tonight, as rain hammered his modest cabin and lightning split the sky, he felt every one of his years pressing down on him like the weight of the storm itself. He climbed down from the roof, muscles aching from the strain. Inside the cabin was warm but empty. The silence that greeted him was the same silence that had kept him company for the past decade, a silence that had grown heavier with each passing year. Nathan removed his soaked coat and hung it by the fire. He just settled into his chair when a sound cut through the howl of the wind, a faint knocking at his door. He frowned. No one in their right mind would be traveling in this weather, and his nearest neighbor lived a good 20 miles away. He reached for his rifle, always kept loaded by the door, before approaching cautiously. The knocking came again, weaker this time. Nathan hesitated only a moment before unbolting the door and pulling it open. A woman stood on his porch, her figure illuminated by a flash of lightning. Her fine dress, though torn and muddied, spoke of wealth and privilege far beyond anything found in these parts. Her face, half hidden by wet auburn hair, held a desperate, haunted expression. As their eyes met, she swayed dangerously. "Please," she whispered before collapsing forward. Nathan dropped his rifle and caught her before she hit the floor. She was lighter than he expected, her body cold and trembling in his arms. For a moment he stood frozen in the doorway, rainwater soaking them both. In the distance he thought he heard horses. Without further hesitation, Nathan carried the unconscious woman inside and kicked the door shut behind him. He laid her gently on his bed and quickly barred the door, extinguishing all but one lamp to minimize light visible from outside. He moved to the window, peering out into the darkness. If someone was following her, they'd have to be mighty determined to continue in this weather. After several tense minutes of watching and listening, he detected no movement outside. The storm had intensified, making it impossible to hear anything beyond the cabin's walls. Nathan turned his attention back to his unexpected guest. She was clearly a lady of means, or had been before whatever circumstances had brought her to his doorstep. Her hands, though dirty from her journey, were soft and uncalloused. Her face, even in unconsciousness, carried a refined beauty that spoke of fine breeding and protected upbringing. A small silver locket hung around her neck, clutched tightly in her hand, even in her unconscious state. A gash on her forehead was bleeding steadily. Nathan retrieved a clean cloth and his small medical kit, a habit from his army days. As he gently cleaned the wound, he couldn't help but notice the contrast between his weathered, calloused hands and her smooth skin. They belonged to different worlds, he and this mysterious woman. Yet as he tended to her, he noticed something unexpected, small calluses on the tips of her fingers, inconsistent with the rest of her pampered appearance. They reminded him of the marks his mother's hands had carried from years of playing the old piano in their Pennsylvania home. The woman stirred slightly, her grip tightening on the silver locket. Nathan carefully covered her with a blanket and moved to his chair by the fire. Whatever her story, it could wait until morning. For now, she needed rest, and he needed to think. Tomorrow, his mail-order bride was scheduled to arrive. Margaret Lewis, a practical woman from Ohio who had responded to his advertisement seeking a partner to share his life and work. After 10 years of solitude, Nathan had finally admitted he couldn't build his dream alone. He needed companionship, help with the ranch, and perhaps if he was fortunate, something more. He stared into the flames, listening to the storm rage outside and the soft breathing of the mysterious woman in his bed. Something told him the life at Horizon Ranch was about to change in ways he couldn't possibly imagine. Rebecca awoke to unfamiliar surroundings. Sunlight streamed through a small window, illuminating a simple but tidy cabin. She lay in a narrow bed covered with a patchwork quilt that smelled of pine and wood smoke. For a moment, disorientation clouded her mind. Then memories of the previous night came flooding back. The escape, the storm, the desperate run through the darkness. She bolted upright, immediately regretting the sudden movement as pain shot through her ribs and head. A cool cloth fell from her forehead into her lap. "Easy now," came a deep voice from across the room. "You took quite a fall." Rebecca turned to find a man watching her from a wooden chair. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with the weathered look of someone who spent his days outdoors. His hair, a rich brown streaked with touches of gray at the temples, was neatly trimmed, and his eyes, a clear, piercing blue, studied her with cautious interest. "Where am I?" she asked, her voice raspy from thirst. "Horizon Ranch, Wyoming territory," he replied, standing to pour water from a pitcher into a cup. "My name's Nathan Morgan. Found you half dead on my doorstep last night." He approached and offered the cup. Rebecca took it with trembling hands, noting the careful distance he maintained, close enough to assist, but respectful enough to put her at ease. The water was cool and sweet, easing the burning in her throat. "Thank you, Mr. Morgan." She set the empty cup aside. "I'm Rebecca. Rebecca Winters." The lie came easily to her lips. She'd been practicing it for weeks now. "I'm a music teacher from Boston." She continued, the story flowing naturally. "I was traveling to Laramie to take a position at a school there when our stage was attacked by bandits. I managed to escape into the woods, but I lost everything, my trunk, my papers." Nathan's expression remained neutral, but something in his eyes suggested he wasn't entirely convinced. Still, he nodded. "You're welcome to rest here until you're recovered, Miss Winters. Nearest town is Miller's Creek, about 15 miles south. I can take you there once you're feeling stronger." Rebecca touched the bandage on her forehead, wincing slightly. "You've been very kind, Mr. Morgan. I won't impose on your hospitality any longer than necessary." "No imposition," he said, simply moving toward the door. "There's fresh water in the basin if you'd like to wash up. I'll be outside tending to chores. Call if you need anything." After he left, Rebecca sank back against the pillow, her mind racing. She needed to continue her journey soon. Wesley would be looking for her, and she couldn't risk being found. But where could she go? Her original plan had been to reach Denver, where her mother's childhood friend lived, but that was still hundreds of miles away. Her hand instinctively went to the silver locket around her neck, the only thing of true value she had managed to bring with her. Inside were the ashes of her mother, Elizabeth Caldwell, who had died under mysterious circumstances 2 years earlier. Officially ruled a suicide, Rebecca had never believed the story. Her mother had been many things, but never a quitter. With careful movements, Rebecca rose from the bed. Her borrowed nightgown, clearly a man's shirt, hung loosely on her frame. Her own dress lay folded on a nearby chair, still damp, but mostly clean. Someone, presumably Mr. Morgan, had attempted to wash out the worst of the mud. She poured water into the basin and splashed her face, the cool liquid reviving her slightly. In the small mirror hanging on the wall, a stranger stared back. Her usually well-coiffed auburn hair hung in tangled waves and dark circles shadowed her eyes. The lady from Boston's high society was gone, replaced by this bedraggled creature. Perhaps that was for the best. Amelia Caldwell needed to disappear if Rebecca Winters was to survive. Nathan worked methodically in the barn, his movements practiced and efficient as he fed the horses and checked their hooves. His mind, however, was far from the task at hand. The woman's story didn't quite add up. The stagecoach route didn't pass within 20 miles of his property, and there had been no reports of bandit activity in the area. Moreover, her hands told a different story than her words. They were too soft for a working woman like a music teacher, yet she had those distinctive calluses on her fingertips. As he finished with the horses, Nathan caught sight of something white sticking out from the pocket of the woman's torn jacket, which he'd hung to dry in the barn. Ordinarily, he would never intrude on a guest's privacy, but his instincts, honed by years of war and frontier living, warned him something wasn't right. He carefully extracted what turned out to be a folded newspaper clipping. It was dated just 3 weeks earlier from a St. Louis paper. The headline read, "Caldwell Huntington engagement announced," accompanied by a photograph of a beautiful young woman standing beside an older, distinguished-looking man. The caption identified them as Miss Amelia Caldwell, daughter of prominent businessman Edward Caldwell, and her fiancé, Senator Walter Huntington. Even with her hair in disarray and a bandage on her forehead, there was no mistaking the woman in his cabin. Amelia Caldwell and Rebecca Winters were one and the same. Nathan carefully refolded the clipping and returned it to the pocket. Whatever her reasons for the deception, they were serious enough to drive her from a life of luxury into the dangerous wilderness. He'd seen enough of the world to know that wealth and privilege didn't guarantee happiness or safety. He was still contemplating this discovery when he heard the approaching sound of a horse. Stepping outside the barn, he spotted a familiar figure on horseback. Pastor Thomas Holloway from Miller's Creek, the only person in these parts who had truly befriended Nathan over the years. The pastor, a tall man in his mid-60s with a full white beard and kind eyes, dismounted with the ease of someone who had spent a lifetime in the saddle. "Nathan, good to see you in one piece after that storm," he called out, securing his horse to a post. "Thought I'd ride out and check on you before the mail coach arrives." "Mail coach?" Nathan frowned. "Yes, didn't you get my telegram?" The pastor looked concerned. "Your bride-to-be, Miss Lewis, the stage company, sent word that she'll be arriving this afternoon instead of next week. Some scheduling change or other." Nathan felt the blood drain from his face. Margaret Lewis, his mail-order bride, was arriving today with an injured, mysterious woman already occupying his cabin. "Something wrong, son?" Pastor Holloway studied him carefully. "Pastor, I've got a situation," Nathan admitted, leading the older man toward the barn where they could speak privately. He briefly explained about the woman who had appeared during the storm, excluding his discovery about her true identity. The pastor listened thoughtfully, stroking his beard. "The Lord works in mysterious ways, Nathan. Perhaps this woman was sent to your doorstep for a reason." "The reason seems to be she's running from something or someone," Nathan replied. "And now Margaret's arriving today." "What does your gut tell you about this woman?" Pastor Holloway asked. Nathan hesitated. "That she's in trouble. Real trouble. But not the kind that comes from being on the wrong side of the law. Then perhaps we should help her as the Good Samaritan would. I can delay Miss Lewis in town for a day or two. If needed, give your guest time to recover and move on." Nathan shook his head. "No, I made a commitment to Miss Lewis. I'll honor it." He paused. "But I won't turn away someone in need either." "Always did admire your sense of duties," the pastor said with a smile. "It's why I helped you with those letters. In the first place, knew you'd make a good husband to whomever answered your advertisement." They were interrupted by the cabin door opening. Rebecca, or Amelia as Nathan now knew her, stood on the porch dressed in her now clean but still torn dress. She had managed to arrange her hair into some semblance of order, and with her chin held high, she looked every bit the society lady despite her circumstances. "Good morning," she called, her voice clear and composed. "I hope I'm not interrupting." Pastor Holloway turned, his eyebrows rising slightly at the sight of her. Even in her disheveled state, her refined bearing was unmistakable. "Not at all, my dear," he replied warmly. "Thomas Holloway, pastor of the Miller's Creek Church. And you must be—" "Rebecca Winters," she supplied smoothly, descending the porch steps with careful dignity, despite her obvious limp. "Mr. Morgan has been kind enough to offer me shelter after I was separated from the stagecoach during the storm." Nathan noticed how she had slightly altered her story, no mention of bandits now. She was clever, this woman, adapting her tale to be more believable. "Well, Miss Winters, you couldn't have found a better man to help you in your time of need," Pastor Holloway said. "Nathan here is one of the finest men in the territory, though he'd never admitted himself." Rebecca smiled, and for a moment, Nathan caught a glimpse of genuine warmth beneath her carefully controlled exterior. I've already discovered Mr. Morgan's generosity. I hope to impose on it for just one more night before continuing my journey. Nathan cleared his throat. Miss Winters, there's something you should know. I'm expecting a guest this afternoon, Margaret Lewis. He hesitated. She's coming here to be my wife. Rebecca's eyes widened slightly, but she recovered quickly. Oh, I had no idea, Mr. Morgan. I wouldn't dream of intruding on such an occasion. Perhaps Pastor Holloway could take me to town today instead. Nonsense, Nathan said firmly. You're injured and need rest. Margaret will understand. He hoped that was true. His correspondence with Margaret Lewis had been pleasant but formal. She seemed a practical, no-nonsense woman who understood the challenges of frontier life. Still arriving to find another woman already in her future home wasn't the best first impression. I should be going, Pastor Holloway said. Need to meet that stage when it arrives. Miss Winters, it was a pleasure. Nathan, I'll bring Margaret out this evening, give you time to explain the situation. After the pastor departed, an awkward silence fell between Nathan and Rebecca. She was the first to break it. You're getting married, she said softly. Congratulations. Not exactly married, Nathan clarified. Margaret and I have never met. She answered my advertisement for a partner to help with the ranch. He felt oddly embarrassed explaining this to a woman who had grown up in high society, where marriages were carefully arranged affairs between suitable families. To his surprise, Rebecca didn't seem shocked or judgmental. I think it's admirable, she said, two people choosing each other based on mutual need and respect, rather than— She trailed off a shadow crossing her face. Rather than what? Nathan prompted. Rebecca shook her head. Nothing. I should rest before your bride arrives. I want to look somewhat presentable, not like something the cat dragged in. As she turned to go back inside, Nathan found himself calling after her. Miss Winters. She paused, looking back at him with those intelligent green eyes. Whatever you're running from, he said quietly, you're safe here for as long as you need to be. Something flashed across her face, fear, gratitude, relief, he couldn't quite tell. Then she nodded once and disappeared into the cabin. Nathan remained outside staring at the closed door. He had just offered sanctuary to a woman who had lied about her identity, who was clearly fleeing from a life most would envy on the very day his mail-order bride was set to arrive. What in heaven's name was he thinking? I say, Pastor Holloway rode toward Miller's Creek, his mind troubled by the woman he had just met. There was something familiar about her, though he couldn't quite place it. As the town came into view, he noticed unusual activity around the bank. Samuel Dixon, the bank owner, was speaking animatedly with several well-dressed men who were clearly not locals. The pastor slowed his horse, nodding politely as he passed. Dixon, a stocky man in his 50s with cold eyes and an insincere smile, paused his conversation to acknowledge him. Pastor, just the man I wanted to see. These gentlemen are potential investors from back east. We were just discussing the promising future of our little community. The tallest of the strangers, a distinguished-looking man with silver at his temples, extended his hand. Senator Walter Huntington, Pastor. A pleasure to meet a man of God in these frontier lands. Pastor Holloway felt a chill run down his spine at the name. Huntington. Why was that name familiar? The pleasure is mine, Senator, he replied, shaking the offered hand. What brings you to our humble town? Progress, Pastor. The railroad is expanding westward, and we're surveying potential routes. Your little Miller's Creek could become an important stop. Dixon was practically glowing with excitement. Can you imagine, Pastor, our town, a railroad hub, property values would soar. Speaking of which, have you reconsidered my offer to purchase your church land? The church isn't for sale, Mr. Dixon, Pastor Holloway replied firmly, and neither is Nathan Morgan's ranch before you ask again. Dixon's smile tightened. Morgan is sitting on the largest underground spring in the region and doesn't even realize its value. That stubborn fool could be rich if he'd just see reason. Senator Huntington's eyes sharpened with interest. Underground spring, you say freshwater, is essential for steam engines. Absolutely. Dixon nodded eagerly. And Morgan's ranch sits right along the most logical path for the railroad. But he refuses to sell, living out there alone like some hermit. Not alone for much longer, Pastor Holloway corrected. His mail-order bride arrives today. Dixon laughed. What woman in her right mind would choose to live out there with that scarred war veteran? I give it 3 months before she runs back east. Pastor Holloway felt his temper rising. Nathan Morgan is worth 10 of you, Dixon. He built something from nothing while you've merely profited from others' hard work. Dixon's face darkened. Careful, Pastor. Even men of God need banking services. Gentlemen, Senator Huntington interrupted smoothly, let's not quarrel. Pastor, we're hoping to speak with the local landowners about our plans. Perhaps you could arrange a meeting. I'll mention it to them, Pastor Holloway replied noncommittally. Now, if you'll excuse me, I need to meet the incoming stage. As he rode toward the stagecoach station, the pastor's mind worked furiously. Senator Huntington, the name had triggered something in his memory. He would need to check the newspapers in his study when he returned. Rebecca sat in Nathan's chair by the window watching him work in the distance. He moved with purpose and efficiency, his broad shoulders easily handling tasks that would require two ordinary men. There was something compelling about his self-sufficiency, so different from the men she had known in Boston and St. Louis. She fingered the newspaper clipping hidden in her pocket. 3 weeks ago, she had been Amelia Caldwell, dutiful daughter and reluctant fiancée. Now she was Rebecca Winter's fictional music teacher and fugitive. The engagement announcement had been the final straw. Senator Walter Huntington was 30 years her senior, a widower with political ambitions that perfectly aligned with her father's business interests. The marriage would unite Huntington's political power with the Caldwell fortune, a merger, rather than a union of hearts. Her mother would have been horrified. Elizabeth Caldwell had been a renowned pianist before her marriage, sacrificing her career to become Edward Caldwell's wife. She had instilled in her daughter a love for music and independence, quietly encouraging Amelia to dream beyond the constraints of society's expectations. When Elizabeth died, supposedly by her own hand, Amelia had been devastated. But she had never believed the official story. Her mother had been in high spirits in the days before her death, excitedly sharing plans for Amelia's future musical education in Europe. Suicide made no sense. 2 years of dutiful mourning followed, during which her father had gradually restricted her freedom and access to her mother's family. Then came the announcement of her engagement to Huntington, an arrangement made without her knowledge or consent. That night, Amelia had discovered the land deeds in her father's study documents, proving that valuable property in Colorado, her mother's inheritance, was being transferred to Huntington as part of the marriage settlement, property that by rights should have come to her. The decision to flee had been made in that moment. Using money she had secretly saved from her allowance, she had planned her escape meticulously. A new identity, a train ticket west, careful steps to ensure she wouldn't be followed, until the storm had separated her from the train, forcing her to continue on foot through unfamiliar territory. Now here she was, in the home of a stranger who was about to welcome his mail-order bride. The irony wasn't lost on her. She had fled one arranged marriage only to land in the middle of another. Yet something about Nathan Morgan intrigued her. Despite his rough exterior, there was a gentleness in how he had tended her wounds. His eyes held intelligence and depth that belied his frontier farmer appearance. And unlike the men of her father's circle who measured worth in dollars and social connections, Nathan had built something real with his own hands. The sound of hoofbeats pulled her from her thoughts. Looking out the window, she saw Nathan striding toward the approaching rider, a young boy no more than 12 on a winded pony. Rebecca opened the window slightly to hear their conversation. "Mr. Morgan," the boy called, breathless with excitement. "Pastor sent me to tell you stagecoach broke an axle about 5 miles south. Miss Lewis is fine, but they won't make it today. Pastor's putting her up at the church tonight, says he'll bring her out tomorrow morning instead." Relief washed over Rebecca, followed immediately by guilt. She shouldn't be glad for the delay in Margaret Lewis's arrival, yet she couldn't deny the feeling. "Thanks, Tommy," Nathan replied, reaching into his pocket and flipping the boy a coin. "You ride back careful now, you hear?" As the boy galloped away, Nathan turned toward the cabin. His eyes met Rebecca's through the window, and for a moment something unspoken passed between them. Then he nodded slightly and returned to his work. Rebecca closed the window and leaned back in the chair. One more night of sanctuary before reality intruded. One more night to decide her next move. Twilight settled over Horizon Ranch, painting the sky in shades of purple and gold. Nathan sat on the porch whittling a piece of wood with practiced strokes of his knife. The familiar activity helped calm his thoughts, which had been in turmoil since discovering his guest's true identity. Inside, Rebecca moved about the cabin, preparing the simple meal they would share. She had insisted on cooking, claiming it was the least she could do to repay his hospitality. Through the open door, he could hear her humming softly a complex melody that confirmed his suspicion about those calloused fingertips. She was indeed a musician, even if the rest of her story was fabrication. The smell of cornbread and beans drifted out to him, making his stomach rumble appreciatively. It had been a long time since anyone but himself had cooked in that kitchen. "Supper's ready, Mr. Morgan," Rebecca called from the doorway. Nathan pocketed his knife in the half-finished carving, then rose to join her inside. The table had been set neatly, the mismatched plates and utensils arranged with a precision that spoke of formal training. Rebecca had even found a jar of wildflowers to place as a centerpiece. "Looks mighty fine," he said suddenly, self-conscious about the simplicity of his home. What must she think coming from the luxury she was clearly accustomed to? "I hope it tastes acceptable," she replied, a hint of nervousness in her voice. "I'm afraid my cooking skills are rather theoretical. Mother insisted I learn the basics, but we always had staff to handle the actual preparation." Nathan sat down, noticing how she waited for him before taking her own seat, another sign of her refined upbringing. "I'm not particular," he assured her. "After 10 years of my own cooking, anything different is welcome." They ate in comfortable silence for a few minutes. The food was simple but well prepared. She had followed his instructions for cornbread perfectly, and the beans were seasoned just right. "May I ask you something, Mr. Morgan?" Rebecca finally broke the silence. Nathan nodded, curious. "Why did you decide to advertise for a mail-order bride? You seem quite self-sufficient." He considered the question, taking a sip of water before answering. "Land's one thing, a home's another. Been building this ranch for 10 years, but it's never felt finished." He gestured around the cabin. "No point in creating something if there's no one to share it with." Rebecca's eyes softened. "That's surprisingly romantic for such a practical arrangement." Nathan shrugged, slightly embarrassed. "Nothing romantic about it. Ranch this size needs more than one pair of hands. And Miller's Creek ain't exactly overflowing with eligible women." "What about Miss Lewis? What do you know about her?" "Not much," Nathan admitted. "Her letters were straightforward. She's 33, never been married, worked as a seamstress in Cincinnati, said she was looking for a fresh start somewhere her skills would be useful." He paused. "Seems practical. Understands this won't be an easy life." Rebecca nodded thoughtfully. "And you've never met her?" "That's how these arrangements work," he said simply. "We exchange letters, come to an agreement. Pastor Holloway helped with the writing. My penmanship ain't the best." "Will you marry her right away?" Nathan shook his head. "Told her we'd have a 6-month understanding first. Give us both time to be sure. If either of us decides it won't work, I'll pay her fare back east." "That's very honorable of you," Rebecca said softly. Nathan looked at her directly. "Miss Winters, or should I say Miss Caldwell?" Rebecca froze her fork halfway to her mouth. I, I don't know what you mean." "Found the newspaper clipping in your coat pocket," he said, keeping his voice gentle, "about your engagement to Senator Huntington." The color drained from her face. For a moment, he thought she might deny it or flee, but then her shoulders sagged in defeat. "Are you going to turn me in?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Turn you in for what? Far as I know, changing your name and running from an engagement ain't crimes." He studied her carefully. "Unless there's more to the story." Rebecca set down her fork, her appetite clearly gone. "My father is Edward Caldwell. He owns shipping companies, banks, and enough politicians to make life very difficult for anyone who crosses him, including his daughter. And the senator, a means to an end for my father. The marriage would secure railroad contracts worth millions." Her voice turned bitter. "I am simply the currency for the transaction." "So you ran?" Rebecca nodded. "After my mother died." Her voice caught. "After she was killed, I had no one left to protect me from my father's ambitions." "Killed?" Nathan leaned forward. "I thought the papers said suicide." "That was the official ruling." Rebecca's hand went to the silver locket around her neck. "But I know my mother. She would never have taken her own life, especially not when she was fighting to protect me and her family's land in Colorado." Land in Colorado. My mother came from pioneer stock. Her grandfather settled near what's now Denver when it was still just a mining camp. The land has been in her family for generations. Rebecca's eyes flashed with anger. Land that my father is now transferring to Huntington as part of our marriage settlement land, that should be mine by right. Nathan sat back taking in this information. That's why you ran. Not just because of the marriage, but because of the land. The land, my freedom, my mother's memory, all of it, Rebecca confirmed. I couldn't let them erase everything she stood for. Nathan was silent for a long moment, turning over her story in his mind. It had the ring of truth filled with the kind of details that couldn't be easily invented. What's your plan now? He finally asked. I was headed to Denver to my mother's childhood friend. She might be able to help me contest the land transfer. Rebecca sighed. But now I don't know. They'll be looking for me. Wesley Hamilton, my father's assistant, is relentless. He'll track me down eventually. Not if they don't know where to look, Nathan said thoughtfully. Rebecca looked at him with confusion. What do you mean Wyoming Territory's a big place? Plenty of folks come here to start fresh, leave their past behind. He held her gaze steadily. You could stay here at least until you're healed up proper. Figure out your next move. But your bride, Miss Lewis, I'll explain the situation. If she's the kind of woman I think she is, she'll understand helping someone in need. Rebecca studied him with wonder. Why would you do this? You don't know me. I've lied to you from the moment we met. Nathan considered the question seriously. Why indeed he had built his life around routine and self-reliance, avoiding complications and entanglements. Yet something about this woman's courage in fleeing everything she had ever known resonated with him. During the war, he said slowly, I saw too many people stand by while others suffered. Decided then I wouldn't be that kind of man. He shrugged. Besides, got plenty of room here. Won't put me out none to have you stay a while. Rebecca's eyes glistened with unshed tears. Thank you, Mr. Morgan. I don't know how I'll ever repay such kindness. Nathan, he corrected. If you're staying, might as well use my given name. Nathan, she repeated softly, and please call me Rebecca. I've been Amelia all my life, but never felt like it suited me. Rebecca was my grandmother's name, my mother's mother. It feels right. As they finished their meal in companionable silence, Nathan reflected on the strange turn his life had taken in just 24 hours. Tomorrow, Margaret Lewis would arrive expecting to find her future husband waiting. Instead, she would discover he had already taken in another woman, a fugitive from wealth and privilege, running from a powerful man. Life at Horizon Ranch was about to get considerably more complicated. In the still darkness before dawn, Rebecca stood by the window of Nathan's cabin, watching as the first hint of light touched the eastern horizon. She hadn't slept well, her dreams haunted by her father's cold eyes and Wesley Hamilton's relentless pursuit. Nathan had insisted she keep the bed while he slept on a pallet by the fire. She had protested, but he wouldn't hear of it, displaying the same quiet stubbornness that seemed to define his character. Now, as she observed the vast emptiness surrounding the ranch, she understood why Nathan had persevered here despite the challenges. There was a wild beauty to this place, a sense of possibility and freedom that she had never experienced in the carefully manicured gardens and parlors of her previous life. The sound of movement behind her indicated Nathan was awake. He rose silently, nodding a greeting before moving outside to begin his morning chores. Through the window, she watched him stride toward the barn, his movements purposeful and efficient in the growing light. There was something compelling about his self-sufficiency, so different from the men she had known. Nathan Morgan built things with his hands, faced nature on its own terms, and stood firmly on ground he had claimed through sheer determination. Rebecca turned from the window and moved to the small mirror hanging on the wall. She hardly recognized herself. The proper young lady from St. Louis was gone, replaced by this wild-haired woman with sunburned cheeks and determined eyes. The transformation was startling, but not entirely unwelcome. For the first time in her life, she felt the possibility of becoming someone defined by her own choices rather than others' expectations. She dressed quickly in her torn dress, the only clothing she had, and set about preparing breakfast. It was the least she could do to repay Nathan's kindness. By the time he returned from the barn, she had coffee brewing and biscuits in the oven. You didn't have to do that, he said, washing his hands in the basin by the door. I wanted to, she replied simply. I may not be much use around a ranch, but I can at least manage breakfast. Nathan studied her for a moment, then nodded. Appreciate it. Margaret should arrive around midday if the stage is running on schedule. Rebecca felt a twinge of something like disappointment at the mention of Margaret Lewis. I've been thinking, she said carefully. Perhaps I should make myself scarce when she arrives. First impressions are important, and finding another woman in her new home might not be the best welcome. Honesty's important too, Nathan countered. If Margaret and I are to build a life together, it'll be built on truth, starting with why you're here. Before Rebecca could respond, the sound of approaching horses caught their attention. Nathan moved to the window, his body tensing at whatever he saw. Stay inside, he instructed, his voice suddenly hard with authority. He reached for his rifle, checking that it was loaded before heading to the door. What is it? Rebecca asked, fear clutching at her heart. 3 riders, well-dressed, not from around here. His eyes met hers. Could be nothing. Could be something. Either way, stay out of sight. Rebecca nodded, backing away from the window. Through a small gap in the curtains, she could see 3 men on horseback approaching the cabin. The lead rider was immediately recognizable: Wesley Hamilton, her father's right-hand man, and the person most determined to bring her back to St. Louis. Her heart pounded in her chest as Nathan stepped onto the porch, rifle held casually but visibly at his side. The rider stopped a respectful distance from the house. Morning, Nathan called, his voice neutral. Something I can help you gentlemen with? Wesley, a tall man with silver-streaked dark hair and cold eyes, smiled thinly. I certainly hope so, sir. We're looking for a young woman who may have passed this way. The daughter of a prominent St. Louis businessman. I'm afraid she's not in her right mind. Her father is terribly worried. Not many women pass through these parts, Nathan replied. Nearest town's Miller's Creek, about 15 miles south. Might try there. Wesley's smile didn't reach his eyes. We've already inquired in town. A helpful banker, Mr. Dixon, I believe, mentioned there was a ranch out this way. Suggested the owner might have seen something. Rebecca's blood ran cold. Dixon, of course he would direct them, or he had been trying to get Nathan's land for years, according to what Pastor Holloway had said yesterday. Haven't seen any young ladies from St. Louis, Nathan said firmly. Now, if you'll excuse me, I've got chores waiting. Wesley dismounted smoothly, his expensive boots raising dust as he approached the porch. Perhaps we could trouble you for some water for our horses. It's been a long ride. It was a ploy Rebecca knew to get closer to the house, to look inside, to search for signs of her presence. She shrank back from the window, heart hammering. Troughs by the barn, Nathan replied, not moving from his position. Help yourselves. Wesley's expression hardened slightly. Very kind of you, Mr. Morgan, Nathan Morgan. Mr. Morgan. Wesley nodded. I should introduce myself. Wesley Hamilton, personal assistant to Edward Caldwell. These are my associates, Mr. Finch and Mr. Dawson. The other 2 men remained mounted, their hands resting casually near their holstered pistols. The message was clear: they were armed and prepared to use force if necessary. The young lady we're seeking is Miss Amelia Caldwell. Wesley continued, producing a photograph from his breast pocket. Mr. Caldwell's daughter. She disappeared from home several days ago, taking with her some valuable family heirlooms. Her father is offering a substantial reward for information leading to her safe return. Nathan barely glanced at the photograph. Like I said, haven't seen anyone matching that description. Wesley studied Nathan's face intently. Mr. Morgan, harboring a fugitive is a serious offense. If you know something about Miss Caldwell's whereabouts, it would be better for all concerned if you shared that information now. Fugitive, Nathan's eyebrows rose. Thought you said she was a daughter in trouble. Now you're calling her a criminal. She took items of considerable value when she fled, Wesley explained smoothly. Family documents, jewelry, items that don't belong to her. Inside the cabin, Rebecca clutched her mother's locket. The only thing she had taken was this, containing her mother's ashes and the small folded paper hidden in its secret compartment. Everything else had been left behind. Sounds like a family matter, Nathan observed. Not sure what it has to do with me. Wesley's patience was clearly wearing thin. Mr. Morgan, we have reason to believe Miss Caldwell passed through this area. If you're hiding her— I'm not hiding anyone, Nathan interrupted, his voice hard. And unless you have a warrant, I'd appreciate it if you'd water your horses and move on. I'm expecting company today and need to prepare. Wesley stared at Nathan for a long moment, then nodded curtly. Very well. We'll be on our way. But should you happen to encounter Miss Caldwell, I suggest you contact the authorities immediately. She's not well, Mr. Morgan. Her father only wants what's best for her. As the three men returned to their horses, Wesley paused. One more thing, Mr. Morgan. The land deed Miss Caldwell took is extremely valuable, a key piece in an important business transaction. Anyone found in possession of it would face serious legal consequences. Nathan remained impassive. I'll keep that in mind. Rebecca watched as the riders departed, heading back toward Miller's Creek. Only when they were tiny specks in the distance did Nathan return, inside his face grim. They're looking for you, he said unnecessarily. And they've got the law on their side, or will soon enough. Rebecca sank into a chair, trembling slightly. Wesley Hamilton is my father's most trusted employee. He'll stop at nothing to bring me back. What did you take? Nathan asked directly. He mentioned land deeds. I didn't take any deeds, Rebecca replied truthfully. The only thing I brought was this. She touched the silver locket. It contains my mother's ashes. Everything else I left behind. Nathan frowned. Then why claim you stole documents? Because they need a legal reason to force my return. Running away from an unwanted engagement isn't a crime, but theft is. Rebecca's mind raced. They must have discovered the Colorado land deeds are missing and assumed I took them. Where are the deeds if you didn't take them? Rebecca shook her head. I don't know. I saw them in my father's study the night I decided to leave, but I didn't touch them. Nathan paced the small cabin, thinking. This complicates things. They'll be watching the roads, probably head back to Miller's Creek to convince the sheriff to help them search. I should leave, Rebecca said decisively. I've already put you in danger by staying this long. And go where? Nathan challenged. On foot with no supplies in unfamiliar territory, you wouldn't last 2 days. I can't stay here and risk your arrest when Margaret arrives. Nathan was silent for a moment, considering. There's an old line shack about 5 miles north of here. Used it when I first settled the land before the cabin was built. It's not much, but it's shelter. You could stay there for a few days while we figure this out. Rebecca stared at him. I gave you my word you'd be safe here, Nathan said simply. I don't go back on my word. Why? Rebecca asked, genuinely puzzled. Why would you risk everything for a stranger? Your ranch, your future with Margaret, possibly even your freedom. Nathan moved to the window, looking out at the land he had worked for a decade to tame. During the war, he said slowly, I made a promise to a dying friend that I'd live a life worth the sacrifice he made, turning away someone in need that wouldn't honor his memory. He turned back to face her. I'll take you to the line shack this morning. Got some supplies stored there enough to last a few days. After Margaret arrives and gets settled, I'll come check on you, bring more provisions. Rebecca felt tears welling in her eyes. I don't know how to thank you. Don't thank me yet, Nathan replied grimly. We're not out of this by a long shot. As they prepared to leave, gathering what few supplies Rebecca would need, she couldn't help but wonder what kind of woman Margaret Lewis must be to have earned the loyalty of such a man sight unseen, and whether she herself would have found similar courage had their positions been reversed. The line shack stood on a small rise overlooking a meandering creek, sheltered by a grove of cottonwood trees. It was a simple one-room structure built of rough-hewn logs with a stone chimney and a single window. Years of Wyoming winters had weathered the exterior to a silvery gray, but the roof was sound and the door hung straight on its hinges. Nathan dismounted first, helping Rebecca down from the horse they had shared for the 5-mile journey. The ride had been conducted mostly in silence, both of them alert for any sign of pursuit. It's not much, Nathan said, pushing open the door, but it'll keep you dry and warm. Rebecca stepped inside, taking in the sparse interior. A narrow cot stood against one wall, a small table and chair beneath the window, and a stone fireplace dominated the opposite wall. A few shelves held basic supplies, matches, candles, dried beans, and coffee. It's perfect, she said sincerely. I couldn't ask for more. Nathan busied himself lighting a fire in the hearth. Creek provides fresh water, wood piles round back. Got some jerky and hardtack stored in that chest. Should tide you over until I can bring more supplies. As the flames caught and began to warm the small space, Rebecca sat on the edge of the cot and suddenly overwhelmed by the reality of her situation. She was miles from civilization, hiding in a hunter's cabin, dependent on the kindness of a man she had met only yesterday, a man who was about to welcome his mail-order bride. "What will you tell Margaret?" she asked quietly. Nathan straightened from the fire, brushing dust from his hands. "The truth. As much of it as I can without putting her in danger too. And if she insists you turn me in—" "She won't," Nathan said with a certainty that surprised Rebecca. "The woman who wrote those letters, she has a good heart. Wouldn't want to see anyone forced into a life they didn't choose." Rebecca nodded, hoping he was right. "I'll stay out of sight. I promise not to cause any more trouble for you." Nathan's expression softened slightly. "You're not trouble, Rebecca. You're someone who needed help. There's a difference." He moved to the door, pausing with his hand on the latch. "I'll come check on you tomorrow, bring fresh supplies. If anything happens, if Hamilton and his men come back, there's a rifle under the bed and ammunition in the chest, but only use it as a last resort." After he left, Rebecca sat alone in the small cabin, listening to the sound of his horse's hoofbeats fading into the distance. The fire crackled in the hearth, casting dancing shadows on the walls. Outside, wind rustled through the cottonwood leaves, and somewhere nearby, a bird called to its mate. For the first time since fleeing St. Louis, she allowed herself to truly feel the weight of what she had done, abandoning the only life she had ever known, risking everything on a desperate bid for freedom. Tears came then hot and fast, streaming down her cheeks as she hugged herself tightly. She cried for her mother, whose mysterious death had left her alone and unprotected. She cried for the life she had left behind, not with regret, but with the bittersweet recognition that some doors once closed could never be reopened. And she cried with relief that against all odds, she had found a safe harbor, however temporary, in this wild country. When the tears finally subsided, Rebecca moved to the small window, gazing out at the vast Wyoming landscape spread before her. The afternoon sun bathed the rolling hills in golden light, highlighting the meandering creek and distant mountains. This land was nothing like the manicured gardens and crowded streets of her past. It was raw, untamed, demanding respect rather than submission. It offered no guarantees, no safety net of wealth and privilege, only the promise that one could forge one's own path for better or worse. Perhaps that was what Nathan had found here. Not just land to claim, but the freedom to become the man he chose, to be answerable only to his own conscience. Rebecca touched the silver locket around her neck, thinking of her mother. Elizabeth Caldwell had been trapped in a gilded cage, her spirit slowly crushed beneath the weight of society's expectations and her husband's ambition. She had dreamed of escape, but never found it. "I'll finish what you started, Mother," Rebecca whispered to the empty room. "I'll reclaim your family's land. I'll live the life you wanted for me." With renewed determination, she began to organize the small cabin, making it as comfortable as possible for what might be an extended stay. Tomorrow, Margaret Lewis would arrive at Horizon Ranch, and everything would change once again. But for now, in this moment, Rebecca Caldwell, no Rebecca Winters, was exactly where she needed to be. Nathan returned to find Pastor Holloway waiting at the cabin, seated on the porch with a concerned expression. The older man stood as Nathan dismounted, his eyes taking in the empty saddle where Rebecca should have been. "Where is Miss Winters?" he asked without preamble. "Somewhere safe," Nathan replied, securing his horse. "Had some unwelcome visitors this morning." The pastor's expression darkened. "Hamilton and his men. You know them. They've been asking questions all over Miller's Creek. Dixon's been more than happy to help them." Pastor Holloway sighed heavily. "Nathan, there's something you should know. I recognized the name Huntington when we met yesterday, but couldn't place it. When I got home, I checked my recent newspapers." He produced a folded newspaper from his coat pocket, the same St. Louis paper that had contained the engagement announcement Nathan had found in Rebecca's coat. "Senator Walter Huntington," the pastor continued, "is currently in Miller's Creek meeting with Dixon about a potential railroad route through our region." Nathan felt a chill run down his spine. "Here now," Pastor Holloway nodded grimly. "And that's not all. Dixon has been talking about buying up land along the proposed route, including your ranch. Says your underground spring would be perfect for supplying water to steam engines." "That explains why Hamilton came straight here," Nathan said, the pieces falling into place. "Dixon must have told them about Rebecca's arrival during the storm." "Nathan," Pastor Holloway's voice was grave, "these are powerful men. If they're determined to find Miss Caldwell—" "Winters," Nathan corrected automatically. "She prefers Rebecca Winters now." The pastor raised an eyebrow but continued, "If they're determined to find her, they won't stop at asking questions. There's already talk of organizing a search party, claiming she's mentally unstable and in danger. Nathan's jaw tightened. She's perfectly sane, just unwilling to be sold like cattle to advance her father's business interests. I believe you, Pastor Holloway assured him, but the law might not see it that way, especially if Huntington and Caldwell are as influential as they appear to be. What about Margaret? Nathan asked. Is she still coming today? The pastor nodded. She's resting at my home now. The stagecoach journey was difficult, but she's a remarkably resilient woman. I'll bring her out this afternoon as planned. Nathan ran a hand through his hair, feeling the weight of responsibility pressing down on him. Pastor, I don't know what to do. I gave Rebecca my word she'd be safe here, but I also made a commitment to Margaret. The Lord rarely sends us easy choices, my friend, Pastor Holloway said gently. But he always provides the strength to make them if we're willing to listen to our conscience. Nathan nodded thoughtfully. Would you do something for me? When you return to town, could you discreetly ask around about land, deeds for property in Colorado? Hamilton accused Rebecca of stealing documents related to her mother's family land. She claims she didn't take them, but someone must have. I'll see what I can discover, the pastor promised. The church archives contain records going back to the early settlements. If this land has been in her mother's family for generations, there might be something there. After Pastor Holloway departed, Nathan entered the cabin feeling its emptiness acutely. Rebecca had only been there for a day, yet somehow her absence was palpable. The breakfast dishes were still on the table where they had left them in their haste to hide her before Hamilton's arrival. As he cleaned up and Nathan pondered the situation, Rebecca was safe for now in the line shack, but that was a temporary solution at best. Hamilton and his men would eventually expand their search beyond Miller's Creek, and with Huntington himself in the area, the stakes were even higher. Then there was Margaret Lewis arriving today to begin her new life at Horizon Ranch, a woman who had trusted his word enough to travel hundreds of miles to a place she had never seen to marry a man she had never met. He owed her honesty at the very least. Nathan moved to the small chest where he kept his personal papers. Inside was a bundle of letters, his correspondence with Margaret over the past 6 months. Rereading them now, he was struck by her straightforward approach to their arrangement. There was no pretense of romantic sentiment, just practical discussions of expectations and responsibilities. I do not seek romance, Mr. Morgan, nor do I harbor illusions about frontier life, she had written in her first letter. What I desire is a partnership based on mutual respect and shared purpose. I bring skills in sewing, cooking, and basic medical care, as well as a willingness to learn whatever else is required. In return, I ask only for honesty, respect, and the opportunity to build a life that is my own. Honesty. She had asked for honesty above all else. Could he begin their life together with a deception, however well-intentioned? As the afternoon sun began its descent toward the western horizon, Nathan prepared for Margaret's arrival. He cleaned the cabin thoroughly, put fresh linens on the bed, and arranged the small bouquet of wildflowers Rebecca had picked yesterday. It wasn't much, but he wanted Margaret's first impression of her new home to be a positive one. Just as the sun touched the distant mountains casting long shadows across the land, Nathan heard the approaching sound of a wagon. Pastor Holloway had returned, bringing with him the woman who had agreed to share Nathan's life. Taking a deep breath, Nathan stepped onto the porch to greet his bride-to-be, his mind still wrestling with how much of the truth he should reveal. In the small line shack, Rebecca had spent the day making the space as comfortable as possible. She had swept the floor with a makeshift broom of bound twigs, organized the meager supplies, and gathered fresh water from the creek. The physical activity helped keep her mind from dwelling too much on her precarious situation. As evening approached, she sat by the window watching the sky turn from blue to gold to deep purple. In the distance, a coyote called to its pack, the haunting sound echoing across the empty landscape. Her thoughts turned to Nathan and the woman who would be arriving at his ranch today. Margaret Lewis, who had chosen this life willingly, who had corresponded with Nathan and agreed to his terms. What would she be like? Would she understand why Nathan had helped a fugitive? Or would she insist on upholding the law? More selfishly, Rebecca wondered what it would be like to live as Margaret would in a simple cabin, working alongside a man like Nathan to build something lasting. There was an honesty to such an existence that appealed to her after years of navigating the artifice of high society. The sound of approaching hoofbeats jolted her from her reverie. Heart pounding, Rebecca extinguished the candle and moved silently to retrieve the rifle Nathan had left her. Peering cautiously through the window, she waited the weapon ready in her trembling hands. A lone rider emerged from the gathering darkness. Nathan, his broad shoulders unmistakable even in the dim light. Rebecca set aside the rifle with a sigh of relief and reopened the door. "You shouldn't be here," she said as he dismounted. "It's too dangerous with Hamilton's men about." "Needed to make sure you were all right," Nathan replied, tying his horse to a nearby tree. "And to bring you these." He handed her a small bundle wrapped in cloth. Inside, Rebecca found a clean dress, modest but well made, along with a hairbrush and a small bar of soap. "They belong to my mother," Nathan explained, suddenly awkward. "Dwan, kept them all these years, though I'm not rightly sure why. I thought you might have a need of them." Rebecca touched the dress, gently moved by the gesture. "Thank you, this is very kind." Nathan shrugged off her gratitude. Pastor Holloway brought news. Senator Huntington is in Miller's Creek meeting with the local banker about a railroad route. "That's likely why Hamilton came straight on it to my ranch. Dixon must have told them about you." Rebecca felt cold fear wash over her. "Huntington himself is here in Wyoming." "Appears so." Nathan's expression was grim. "Makes your situation more complicated." "And dangerous for you," Rebecca added. "Nathan, I can't stay here. If they find me on your property—" "They won't," he interrupted firmly. "Line Shack isn't on any maps, and few people even know it exists." He paused. "But you're right that it's not a permanent solution." A thought occurred to Rebecca. Did Margaret arrive safely? "What did you tell her about me?" Nathan looked away, his profile sharp against the darkening sky. "She's at the ranch now. Pastor Holloway brought her out this afternoon." "And," Rebecca prompted when he didn't continue, "I told her the truth, that I'd given sanctuary to a woman running from an unwanted marriage. Didn't mention your real name or all the details, but enough for her to understand." "How did she react?" A strange expression crossed Nathan's face, something between confusion and admiration. "Not at all like I expected. She asked practical questions, whether you were safe, if Hamilton's men had seen you here, what our plan was going forward." "Our plan," Rebecca repeated. "Margaret's not one to shy away from complications, it seems." Nathan met her eyes directly. "She suggested you come back to the ranch." "What? That's madness. Hamilton will certainly return." "That's what I said. But Margaret pointed out that hiding you in an isolated cabin just postpones the inevitable. Sooner or later, they'll expand their search." "Then what's her suggestion?" Rebecca asked, bewildered by this unexpected turn. "That we hide you in plain sight, as her sister come to help establish the new household." Nathan ran a hand through his hair. "Says with different clothes, your hair arranged simply, and your hands busy with work, no one who's only seen a photograph would recognize you as Amelia Caldwell." Rebecca sank onto the cot, stunned by the audacity of the plan. She would do that for a complete stranger. "Margaret has her own reasons for understanding your situation," Nathan said carefully. She hasn't had an easy life." "What do you think?" Rebecca asked, studying his face in the fading light. "Do you believe it could work?" Nathan was silent for a moment, considering. "It's risky, but hiding out here alone is risky too. At least at the ranch, we could protect you." "We," Rebecca noted. "You and Margaret." "Yes." Something in his tone suggested this alliance was as surprising to him as it was to her. Rebecca took a deep breath, weighing her options. Remaining in the line shack meant isolation and vulnerability. Returning to the ranch meant risk of discovery, but also protection and human connection. "I'll need to meet her first," she decided, "to see if we could believably pass as sisters." Nathan nodded. "I'll bring her here tomorrow. If you both still think it's possible after meeting, we'll move forward with the plan." As he prepared to leave, Rebecca called after him. "Nathan, thank you for everything." He paused, silhouetted in the doorway. "Don't thank me yet. We're still in the thick of it." After he had gone, Rebecca changed into the dress he had brought, a simple blue calico that was slightly too large but clean and whole. She brushed her tangled hair, the simple act of grooming, restoring a small sense of normalcy. Tomorrow she would meet Margaret Lewis, the woman who had agreed to marry Nathan Morgan, sight unseen. The woman who inexplicably had offered to risk her own safety to help a stranger. What kind of person made such a choice? And what secrets of her own might she be harboring? As night fully descended, Rebecca lay on the narrow cot, listening to the wilderness sounds outside. Somewhere in the darkness, coyotes hunted, owls watched, and stars wheeled overhead in their ancient patterns. Life continued regardless of human troubles. With that oddly comforting thought, she drifted into the first peaceful sleep she had experienced since fleeing St. Louis. The sun had barely cleared the eastern horizon when Nathan entered the cabin to find Margaret already awake and dressed, preparing coffee at the stove. She turned at his entrance, offering a small but genuine smile. "Good morning, Mr. Morgan. I trust you slept well in the barn." "Well enough," he replied, still adjusting to the presence of this unexpected woman in his home. Margaret Lewis was not what he had anticipated from their correspondence. He had imagined someone plain and practical, hardened by life's disappointments. Instead, he had found a woman of quiet dignity and surprising depth. She was perhaps 33, as her letters had stated, with brown hair pulled back in a simple bun and intelligent hazel eyes that missed nothing. Her face, while not conventionally beautiful, held character and strength. She moved with purpose and economy, wasting no motion as she poured coffee into 2 tin cups. "I've been thinking about your friend's situation," Margaret said, handing him a cup. "If we're to pass her off as my sister, we'll need a convincing story." Nathan accepted the coffee gratefully, such as, "Rebecca Winters is my widowed younger sister, come to help establish my new household," Margaret suggested. "She's still in mourning for her husband, which explains her reserved manner around strangers. We were raised in Cincinnati by our mother after our father died in the war." Nathan raised an eyebrow, impressed by the detailed fabrication. "You've given this some thought." "I'm practical, Mr. Morgan, not unimaginative." There was a hint of amusement in her voice. "Besides, the best lies contain elements of truth. My father did die in the war, though my mother passed several years ago as well." "Nathan," he corrected, "if we're to be partners in this deception, seems only right you use my given name." Margaret nodded, a slight flush coloring her cheeks. "Nathan, then. And you must call me Margaret." They sat at the table, the morning light streaming through the windows, as they discussed the details of their plan. Despite the seriousness of the situation, Nathan found himself enjoying Margaret's company. She approached problems methodically, considering angles he might have overlooked. "There's something you should know," Margaret said after a pause in their conversation. "Something I didn't fully explain in my letters." Nathan waited, sensing her hesitation. "I came west not just for a fresh start, but to escape a difficult situation in Ohio." She set down her cup carefully. "I was married before, though I am legally a widow now. My husband was not a kind man." Understanding dawned on Nathan. "That's why you offered to help Rebecca. You know what it's like to be trapped." Margaret nodded, her eyes meeting his with surprising frankness. "When a woman has no legal rights to her own property, no say in her future, and no protection from those who should cherish her, desperate measures become necessary." "Your husband," Nathan said carefully, "what happened to him?" "He died in a barroom brawl 3 years ago." Her voice was perfectly steady. "I mourned the man he could have been, but not who he became." Nathan studied her face, noting the quiet strength there. "I'm sorry for what you endured." "Don't be. It shaped me into who I am today." Margaret straightened her shoulders. "Now shall we fetch your guest and see if our plan has any chance of success?" They rode together to the line shack, Margaret seated behind Nathan on his horse. The morning was clear and bright, the air still cool from the night. As they crested the rise overlooking the creek, Nathan felt Margaret's small gasp of appreciation. "It's beautiful," she said softly. "The vastness of it." "That it is," Nathan agreed, understanding perfectly what she meant. The untamed landscape had captivated him from the first moment he had seen it 10 years earlier. Rebecca was waiting outside the line shack, dressed in the blue calico dress Nathan had brought her. She had arranged her auburn hair, simply pulling it back from her face in a style similar to Margaret's. The effect was striking, the fine-boned beauty of her features somehow enhanced rather than diminished by the plain clothing. As Nathan helped Margaret dismount, the two women regarded each other with mutual curiosity. They were studies in contrast, Rebecca tall and graceful with her auburn hair and green eyes, Margaret more compact with her practical brown bun and direct hazel gaze. Yet both carried themselves with the same quiet dignity. "Miss Winters," Margaret spoke first, extending her hand. "I'm Margaret Lewis. It seems we find ourselves in an unusual situation." Rebecca took the offered hand, her expression cautious but hopeful. "Indeed we do, Miss Lewis. I can't thank you enough for even considering such a risk on my behalf. Please call me Margaret, and I believe we have more in common than might be immediately apparent. The women spoke for nearly an hour, sitting on a fallen log near the creek while Nathan tended to the horse. He kept a respectful distance but couldn't help observing their interaction. Initial wariness gave way to animated conversation punctuated occasionally by shared laughter. When they finally rejoined him, both wore expressions of cautious optimism. "We believe it could work," Margaret announced. "With some adjustments to Rebecca's appearance and manner, we could reasonably pass as sisters." "I'll need to speak differently," Rebecca added. "Less formally. In my hands?" She looked down at her smooth, uncalloused palms. "They betray my lack of practical experience." "Nothing a few days of ranch work won't remedy," Margaret said with surprising good humor. "I'll teach you what I know, and we'll learn the rest together." Nathan looked between the two women, marveling at how quickly they had formed an alliance. "Then you're both determined to go through with this?" "Yes," they answered in unison, then exchanged small smiles at the coincidence. "Very well," Nathan nodded. "Rebecca, gather your things. We'll return to the ranch and begin preparations. Hamilton and his men could return at any time, so we need to be ready." As Rebecca went inside to collect her few belongings, Margaret turned to Nathan, her expression serious. "This won't be easy," she said quietly. "We're defying powerful men who are accustomed to getting their way." "I've never much cared for bullies," Nathan replied simply, "be they in fancy suits or otherwise." Margaret studied his face for a moment. "You're not what I expected, Nathan Morgan." "Is that good or bad?" A slight smile touched her lips. "I haven't decided yet, but I suspect our arrangement will be more interesting than I anticipated." Rebecca emerged from the cabin carrying a small bundle. Her face was composed, but Nathan could see the tension in her shoulders. This return to the ranch represented another leap of faith, another risk in a journey already filled with danger. As they prepared to leave, Rebecca paused, looking back at the line shack and the wild landscape surrounding it. "I've never lived anywhere but cities," she said softly. "Boston, St. Louis, always surrounded by people and noise. But there's something about this place, a kind of freedom I've never known." "That's Wyoming for you," Nathan replied. "Land's too big to hold a person down for long." With that simple truth hanging in the air between them, the unlikely trio began their journey back to Horizon Ranch, where a new chapter in all their lives was about to begin. The transformation was remarkable. In just 3 days, Rebecca Caldwell's society belle and reluctant fiancé to a senator had disappeared. In her place stood Rebecca Winters, modest widow and devoted sister to Margaret Lewis. Her auburn hair, once elaborately styled in the latest fashion, now hung in a simple braid down her back. The fine gowns and delicate shoes had been replaced by a serviceable cotton dress and sturdy boots. Most telling of all were her hands, already showing signs of honest work, small cuts from vegetable gardening, a burn from learning to cook on the temperamental stove calluses forming from handling rope and tools. "Hold still," Margaret instructed, adjusting the worn locket around Rebecca's neck, the only item she had retained from her previous life. "There, now remember you're a music teacher from Cincinnati. Your husband, Thomas Winters, died of fever 2 years ago. You've come west to start fresh with your sister." Rebecca nodded, repeating the fabricated history they had created. "We were raised by our mother after our father died at Shiloh. I taught piano to support myself after Thomas passed." "Good," Margaret approved. "And why haven't we mentioned each other before? We were estranged for several years due to your disapproval of Thomas, but reconciled after his death." Rebecca recited the agreed-upon explanation for why Nathan had never mentioned a sister-in-law in his letters to Margaret. "Perfect. And if anyone asks why we look so different, different fathers. Your father died in the war while mine abandoned our mother before I was born." Margaret smiled, satisfied with Rebecca's preparation. "You learn quickly." "I've had practice pretending to be someone I'm not," Rebecca replied with a touch of bitterness. Society functions required a similar performance, just with different lines. The cabin door opened as Nathan entered, removing his hat as he stepped inside. 3 days of having 2 women in his home had already changed the atmosphere of the place. Small touches, a vase of wildflowers on the table curtains, fashioned from spare fabric. The scent of fresh bread had transformed the utilitarian space into something warmer, more inviting. "Hamilton's men were in town again yesterday," he announced without preamble. Pastor Holloway just rode out to warn us. They're questioning everyone about a disturbed young woman who may have passed through. Rebecca's hand instinctively went to her locket. Did the pastor say if they seemed suspicious about your ranch? Not specifically, Nathan replied, pouring himself a cup of coffee. But Dixon's been telling anyone who'll listen that I'm hiding something out here. That man, Margaret's voice hardened, he cornered me in the general store yesterday asking all manner of questions about my sudden marriage and my mysterious sister. Nathan's expression darkened. What did you tell him? That my personal affairs were none of his concern, Margaret replied with quiet dignity, and that any man who spent so much time gossiping might be better served attending to his own business. Despite the tension, Rebecca couldn't suppress a smile. In the short time she had known Margaret Lewis, she had come to admire the woman's unflappable composure and sharp wit. Dixon wants this land, Nathan said, gazing out the window at the rolling hills of his ranch. Has for years. Now, with the railroad survey, he's more determined than ever. The underground spring, Rebecca guessed. Pastor Holloway mentioned it was valuable. Nathan nodded. Most of this territory struggles with water access. But there's an aquifer under this section of the ranch, provides fresh water year-round, even in drought. Dixon's known about it since I discovered it my first year here. And now the railroad needs water for steam engines. Margaret concluded, her practical mind immediately grasping the situation. No wonder he's allied himself with Senator Huntington. The three fell silent, each contemplating the web of interests that had unexpectedly entangled them. What had begun as Rebecca's personal flight from an unwanted marriage had revealed itself to be part of a larger scheme involving valuable land political influence and now railroad expansion. We need to be prepared, Nathan finally said. Hamilton will eventually come back here with more men, possibly even the sheriff. Our story needs to be perfect. We should practice, Margaret suggested. Rebecca and I have rehearsed our history, but we haven't all three spoken together as a family unit. Family unit. The phrase hung in the air, highlighting the strange intimacy that had developed between the three unlikely allies. They were strangers bound by circumstance, yet in the eyes of the world they needed to present as a newly formed family. Very well, Nathan agreed, setting down his coffee cup. Let's say I'm Hamilton, come to question you about the missing Caldwell woman. He adopted a more formal stance, mimicking Wesley Hamilton's cold demeanor. Mrs. Morgan, Mrs. Winters, forgive the intrusion. I'm seeking information about a young woman who may have passed through this area. Amelia Caldwell, daughter of Edward Caldwell of St. Louis. Have either of you ladies encountered such a person? Margaret stepped seamlessly into character, her expression politely confused. I'm afraid not, sir. My sister and I arrived only recently from Cincinnati. We've encountered few travelers since then. And you, Mrs. Winters, Nathan as Hamilton turned to Rebecca. Have you seen anyone matching this description? Rebecca kept her eyes slightly downcast, as they had practiced a grieving widow would avoid direct eye contact. No, sir. I've been focused on helping my sister establish her new home. I've had little interaction with anyone outside this ranch. Your accent, Nathan pressed, imitating Hamilton's suspicious tone. It sounds rather refined for a music teacher from Ohio. Rebecca felt a flash of panic but recovered quickly. My mother insisted on elocution lessons for both her daughters. She believed proper speech was the mark of a lady regardless of circumstances. Nathan broke character, nodding with approval. Good. That explains any slips in your manner of speaking. What about if they question us separately? Margaret asked. We should be prepared for that as well. Agreed, Nathan said. They'll look for inconsistencies in our stories. And they continued the rehearsal for over an hour, drilling each other on the details of their fabricated history. Where had Rebecca taught music in Cincinnati? How had Margaret and Nathan met through Pastor Holloway's church correspondence network? When exactly had Rebecca arrived, 3 days after Margaret, having followed once her sister, confirmed the marriage had taken place? By the time they finished, Rebecca felt as though she had memorized an entire play complete with backstory and character motivations. It was exhausting but necessary. Their safety depended on this performance. I think we're as prepared as we can be, Nathan finally concluded. Now we just need to avoid arousing further suspicion while we figure out our next move. And what is our next move? Rebecca asked the question that had been hovering unspoken between them. Nathan and Margaret exchanged glances. Pastor Holloway is researching the Colorado land deeds, Nathan said. If we can prove your mother's property was being illegally transferred, it might provide leverage against your father in Huntington. In the meantime, Margaret added, we maintain our charade and keep watch. The moment we suspect Hamilton is closing in, we'll need to consider more drastic options. Such as, Rebecca pressed. Leaving, Nathan said simply. If it comes to that. The implications hung heavy in the air. For Nathan to abandon Horizon Ranch, the land he had worked for 10 years to tame, would be an enormous sacrifice. Yet he was calmly discussing it as a possibility should Rebecca's safety require it. I won't let it come to that, Rebecca said firmly. This is your home. I won't be the cause of you losing it. Sometimes a home is just a place, Margaret said softly, her eyes distant. What matters are the people we choose to protect. Rebecca was struck by the quiet conviction in Margaret's voice. This woman who had endured her own hardships and escape understood better than most the value of freedom over property. For now, Nathan said, breaking the moment of reflection, we continue as planned. Rebecca stays close to the ranch out of sight when strangers approach. Margaret and I present as newlyweds, settling into married life. While secretly harboring a fugitive, Rebecca added with a wry smile. Life's full of surprises, Nathan replied, the corner of his mouth lifting slightly. A week ago, I was a bachelor, preparing to meet my mail-order bride. Now I'm a married man with a sister-in-law conspiring against a senator and a St. Louis businessman. The absurdity of their situation struck them all at once, and laughter slightly tinged with nervousness filled the small cabin. It was a brief moment of lightness in the midst of growing tension, a reminder that even in difficult circumstances, human connection could provide unexpected comfort. As the laughter subsided, Rebecca looked between Nathan and Margaret, these two strangers who had risked everything to help her. Whatever happened next, she knew she had found something precious in this remote Wyoming ranch. People willing to stand by her, not because of her family name or fortune, but simply because it was right. The following morning, Nathan rode into Miller's Creek for supplies. They needed flour, sugar, coffee, and news not necessarily in that order. Information about Hamilton's movements was as essential as any physical provision. The small frontier town was busier than usual, with several well-dressed strangers moving purposefully between the bank, the land office, and the hotel. The railroad survey was clearly in full swing, bringing with it an air of excited speculation among the locals. Nathan tied his horse outside the general store, nodding politely to several acquaintances as he entered. Inside, he found Mrs. Abernathy, the proprietor's wife, arranging a display of canned goods. Mr. Morgan, she greeted him warmly, or should I say the new groom, how is married life treating you? Well enough, Mrs. Abernathy, Nathan replied with practiced ease. Margaret sends her regards. Such a lovely woman, Mrs. Abernathy beamed. And her sister too, though the poor dear seems quite withdrawn. Still grieving her husband, I expect, Nathan maintained his neutral expression, though inwardly he was pleased that Rebecca had been convincing in her role during their brief visit to town 2 days earlier. Yes, Rebecca's still adjusting. The move west has been difficult for her. Naturally, Mrs. Abernathy nodded sympathetically. Losing a spouse is a terrible burden. My cousin Matilda was never the same after her Herbert passed. She leaned closer, lowering her voice. Though I must say there's been quite a stir about another young woman gone missing. Have you heard? Can't say that I have. Nathan lied smoothly, selecting items from the shelves as they spoke. Oh my, yes. A senator has been in town, a real senator, looking for some wealthy young lady who's run away from home. Offering a substantial reward too. $500. Mrs. Abernathy's eyes widened at the sum. Can you imagine? Must be someone important, Nathan commented, keeping his tone casual. The daughter of some big businessman back east. Dixon's been falling all over himself to help with the search. Mrs. Abernathy sniffed disapprovingly. That man would sell his own mother if he thought there was profit in it. As if summoned by the mention of his name, Samuel Dixon himself entered the store accompanied by a tall, distinguished-looking man whom Nathan immediately recognized from Rebecca's newspaper clipping, Senator Walter Huntington. Ah, Morgan, Dixon said with false joviality. Just the man I wanted to see. Senator Huntington is interested in discussing the railroad survey with local landowners. Nathan nodded politely, his face revealing nothing of his inner tension. Senator, good to meet you. Huntington extended his hand, his smile not quite reaching his cold blue eyes. Mr. Morgan, Samuel here tells me you've developed quite the successful ranch from what was once considered worthless land. It's provided for my needs, Nathan replied simply, shaking the offered hand briefly. Admirable, truly admirable, Huntington continued. Self-made men are the backbone of this great nation, which is why I wanted to discuss an opportunity that could benefit both you and the territory's development. I'm listening, Nathan said, though he already knew what was coming. The railroad is surveying routes westward, and your property lies along what our engineers consider the most favorable path. Huntington's voice took on the practiced cadence of a campaign speech. The economic advantages to the region would be substantial. Increased trade population growth investment opportunities. And you'd like my permission to build across my land, Nathan stated flatly. More than that, Mr. Morgan, Dixon interjected eagerly. The senator's investors are prepared to make a generous offer for your entire property. The underground spring makes it particularly valuable for their purposes. Nathan kept his expression neutral, though he noted with interest how quickly they had revealed their true objective. They were in a hurry, perhaps because of Rebecca's escape, perhaps because of other pressures he wasn't aware of. My ranch isn't for sale, he said firmly, but I appreciate the interest. Dixon's false smile tightened. Now, Morgan, don't be hasty. The senator is offering 3 times what that land is worth on the open market. As I said, it's not for sale. Nathan turned back to Mrs. Abernathy. I'll take 5 pounds of flour, 2 of sugar, and a pound of coffee, please. Huntington studied Nathan with new interest, his politician's smile never wavering. You've just recently married, I understand. Congratulations. Perhaps your wife might have a different perspective on such a generous opportunity. Women often have a clearer vision of financial security. The implied threat that they might approach Margaret to undermine Nathan's decision was thinly veiled. Nathan felt a surge of anger but kept it carefully contained. My wife and I are of one mind regarding our home, he replied evenly. Now, if you'll excuse me, gentlemen, I have chores waiting. As Nathan paid for his purchases and prepared to leave, Huntington called after him. One more thing, Mr. Morgan. We're searching for a young woman who may have passed through this area, Amelia Caldwell, daughter of my dear friend Edward Caldwell. If you happen to see or hear anything, there's a substantial reward for information leading to her safe return. Nathan turned, meeting Huntington's gaze directly. I'll keep that in mind. Good day, Senator. Mr. Dixon. Outside, Nathan secured his purchases to his saddle, his mind working furiously. The direct approach from Huntington confirmed what they had suspected. The railroad's interest in his land was inextricably linked to Rebecca's situation. The question was whether Huntington truly believed Rebecca might be in the area, or if he was simply using the search as a pretext to pressure local landowners. As he mounted his horse, Nathan noticed Wesley Hamilton watching him from across the street, standing in the shadow of the hotel porch. Their eyes met briefly, and Nathan felt a chill of certainty Hamilton at least suspected something. He rode out of town at an unhurried pace, careful not to appear concerned or in a hurry. Only when Miller's Creek was well behind him did he urge his horse into a gallop. He needed to warn Margaret and Rebecca their time might be running short. In the cabin, Margaret stood behind Rebecca, patiently demonstrating how to knead bread dough with firm, practiced movements. The secret is not to overwork it, she explained. Just enough to bring it together, then let it rest. Rebecca mimicked the motions, her hands covered in flour. Like this, better, Margaret approved. You have a natural touch. The simple domesticity of the moment struck Rebecca as surreal. 3 weeks ago, she had been attending a symphony in St. Louis, dressed in silk and diamonds. Now she was learning to bake bread in a frontier cabin flour, dusting her calico dress, her hair pulled back in a practical braid. Strangely, she felt more at ease here than she ever had in her father's mansion. May I ask you something personal? Rebecca ventured, continuing to knead the dough. Of course, Margaret replied, wiping her hands on her apron. Why did you agree to become a mail-order bride? You're intelligent, capable. Surely you had options in Cincinnati. Margaret was quiet for a moment, considering the question. Options for a widow with no family and a complicated past are limited even in a city. I could continue as a seamstress, barely earning enough to survive, or I could seek a new beginning. She moved to the window, gazing out at the vast Wyoming landscape. Nathan's letters were honest. No flowery promises, no grand declarations, just a straightforward offer of partnership. After my experience with falsehood disguised as romance, his directness was refreshing. Rebecca nodded, understanding perfectly. And when you arrived to find him harboring a fugitive, most women would have fled back east immediately. A small smile touched Margaret's lips. I recognize something in you, Rebecca. The same desperation I once felt, the same determination to escape a life others had planned without your consent. She turned back from the window, her expression serious. When my first husband was alive, I prayed someone would help me. No one did. I won't be that person who turns away from another woman's need. Rebecca felt a lump form in her throat at the simple sincerity of Margaret's words. Thank you, she whispered, not just for helping me, but for seeing me, the real me. Their moment of connection was interrupted by the sound of approaching hoofbeats, Nathan returning from town earlier than expected. Both women moved to the window, instantly alert to potential danger. Relief washed over them as they recognized Nathan's familiar figure, but his rapid pace suggested urgency. Margaret quickly opened the door as he dismounted and strode toward the cabin. Huntington approached me directly, he announced without preamble as he entered. Offered to buy the ranch. When I refused, he mentioned the search for Amelia Caldwell. Rebecca felt her stomach tighten with fear. Do you think he suspects I'm here? Hard to say, Nathan replied, removing his hat, but Hamilton was watching me closely. I think he's suspicious, even if he doesn't have proof. What about the sheriff? Margaret asked practically. Have they involved him yet? Not officially, but it's only a matter of time. Nathan ran a hand through his hair, a gesture Rebecca had come to recognize as a sign of deep concern. Dixon's been spreading rumors about strange happenings at our ranch, creating an atmosphere where a search wouldn't seem unreasonable. Rebecca sank into a chair, the weight of guilt pressing down on her. This is all my fault. I've put both of you in danger, jeopardized everything you've built here. Stop that, Margaret said firmly. You didn't choose to be treated as property. You didn't create this situation. Margaret's right, Nathan agreed. Besides, this isn't just about you anymore. Huntington and Dixon want my land for the railroad. They'd be pressuring me regardless. Rebecca wasn't entirely convinced, but she appreciated their solidarity. What do we do now? We accelerate our plans, Nathan decided. I'll ride out to see Pastor Holloway this evening. Find out what he's learned about your mother's land deeds. In the meantime, we need to be prepared for visitors. I'll hide my personal belongings, Rebecca said immediately, anything that might reveal my true identity. And I'll prepare a large dinner, Margaret added. If Hamilton returns with the sheriff or others, we'll invite them to eat with us. People are less suspicious when they're sharing a meal. Nathan nodded approvingly. Good thinking. Act natural, but be ready to leave at a moment's notice if things turn sour. The three moved with purpose, each attending to their assigned tasks. Rebecca gathered the few items that connected her to her former life. The newspaper clipping, a small book of poetry her mother had given her, a handkerchief embroidered with the Caldwell family crest. These she wrapped carefully in a handkerchief and concealed beneath a loose floorboard in the corner of the small room that had become hers. The silver locket containing her mother's ashes remained around her neck. She would not part with it regardless of the risk. As Rebecca worked, she could hear Margaret and Nathan speaking in low voices in the main room of the cabin. Their conversation seemed to extend beyond the immediate crisis, touching on the practicalities of their arrangement and their growing partnership. Though they had been thrust together by extraordinary circumstances, something genuine was developing between them, a mutual respect that might in time grow into something deeper. The thought brought an unexpected pang to Rebecca's heart. Despite the danger and uncertainty of her situation, these past days at Horizon Ranch had been among the most authentic of her life. She had found not just sanctuary but connection with the land, with Margaret, and with Nathan himself. What place would there be for her once this crisis passed? What future could she envision beyond the immediate goal of reclaiming her mother's land and escaping her father's control? These unanswerable questions swirled in her mind as she completed her task. For now, survival took precedence over all other concerns. One step at a time, one day at a time, that was all any of them could manage in the face of the gathering storm. Pastor Thomas Holloway's church stood at the edge of Miller's Creek, a simple wooden structure with a modest steeple that served as both spiritual center and community gathering place for the small frontier town. Adjacent to the church was the pastor's home, an equally humble building that nevertheless housed one of the most extensive libraries in the territory. It was to this sanctuary of books and knowledge that Nathan made his way as dusk settled over the town. He had waited until the streets were mostly empty, avoiding the curious eyes that had followed him during his earlier visit to the general store. The pastor answered his knock immediately as if he had been expecting Nathan's arrival. "Come in quickly," he urged, glancing past Nathan at the darkening street before closing and bolting the door. Inside the small parlor was cluttered with stacks of papers, open books, and maps spread across every available surface. A single lamp burned on the desk, casting long shadows across the room. "You've been busy," Nathan observed, taking in the organized chaos. "The Lord helps those who help themselves," Pastor Holloway replied with a small smile. "And in this case, helping ourselves means research, extensive research." He led Nathan to the desk where a faded map of Colorado territory lay open, weighted down by books at each corner. "I've found something, Nathan. Something that changes everything." The pastor's voice held an urgency that captured Nathan's full attention. "What is it?" "The land in Colorado that Rebecca's mother inherited, it's more valuable than even she realizes." Pastor Holloway pointed to a section of the map marked with a penciled circle. "This area near what's now Denver was originally settled by Elizabeth Caldwell's grandfather during the first gold rush." "Gold?" Nathan asked, leaning closer to examine the map. "Not just gold. Coal primarily and potentially oil as well, according to recent geological surveys." The pastor shuffled through a stack of papers, extracting a newspaper clipping. "This report from last year details substantial coal deposits discovered in the exact region owned by the Caldwell family, or more specifically by Elizabeth Caldwell's family, the Harringtons." Nathan's mind raced with the implications. So it's not just land that Huntington wants for the railroad, it's what's under the land. "Precisely." Pastor Holloway nodded gravely. "A railroad connecting these coal deposits to the eastern markets would be worth millions. Add potential oil reserves, and the value becomes incalculable." "Does Rebecca know about this?" "I doubt it. The geological surveys were conducted quietly, their results published only in technical journals and mining company reports." The pastor reached for another document. "But there's more. I found this in the church archives, a copy of Elizabeth Harrington Caldwell's marriage settlement from 1850. Nathan took the yellowed paper, studying the formal legal language carefully. "What am I looking for?" "The third paragraph," Pastor Holloway indicated. "It stipulates that all property belonging to Elizabeth Harrington prior to her marriage would remain her separate estate, not subject to her husband's control. Furthermore, upon her death, such property would pass directly to her children, not to her husband." Understanding dawned on Nathan. So the Colorado land should have gone directly to Rebecca when her mother died. Exactly. Edward Caldwell has no legal right to transfer that property to Huntington or anyone else. It belongs to Rebecca by the terms of her parents' marriage settlement. Nathan felt a surge of hope. This document could be the key to Rebecca's freedom, proof that her father was attempting to sell property he did not legally own. "Is this binding? Would a court uphold it?" Pastor Holloway nodded confidently. "The settlement was properly executed and registered. It's a legal document that would be recognized by any court in the country." "We need to get this information to Rebecca immediately," Nathan said, already rising to leave. The pastor placed a restraining hand on his arm. "There's something else you should know, Nathan. Something I discovered about Elizabeth Caldwell's death." The grave tone of his voice sent a chill down Nathan's spine. "What is it?" "I've been corresponding with a colleague in St. Louis, a minister who attended to the Caldwell family during Elizabeth's final illness. He never believed the official ruling of suicide." Pastor Holloway's eyes were troubled. He had suspicions, but no proof that she was poisoned gradually over time. "By her husband?" Nathan asked, though he already suspected the answer. "Or by someone acting on his orders?" Elizabeth had been asking questions about the Colorado property, expressing interest in its development. She had even consulted a mining engineer about the possibility of coal extraction. Nathan absorbed this information, his jaw tightening with anger. "Rebecca believes her mother was murdered. This confirms her suspicions." "It suggests but doesn't prove," the pastor cautioned. "However, combined with the illegal attempt to sell her property, it paints a disturbing picture of Edward Caldwell's character and intentions. And it means Rebecca is in even greater danger than we thought," Nathan concluded grimly. "If her father would kill his wife over this land, he wouldn't hesitate to silence his daughter as well." Pastor Holloway gathered the most important documents, rolling them carefully and securing them with a leather cord. Take these to Rebecca. They may be her best protection. Knowledge is power, especially when confronting men like Caldwell and Huntington. As Nathan prepared to leave, the pastor added one final warning. Be careful, my friend. Hamilton has been asking specific questions about your ranch, not just general inquiries, but details about your daily routine, who comes and goes. Someone in town is informing him. Dixon, Nathan guessed. Most likely, but he's not the only one seduced by the promise of railroad money. Pastor Holloway's expression was somber. These are powerful forces you're opposing, Nathan. Economic interests, political ambitions, personal vendettas, all converging on your small ranch. We knew the risks, Nathan replied simply. Indeed. The pastor studied him thoughtfully. You've changed, you know. A year ago, you would have avoided any involvement in such complications. Nathan considered this observation. It was true he had deliberately built a solitary life, keeping the world and its problems at arm's length. Yet when Rebecca had collapsed on his doorstep that stormy night, something had shifted inside him. The protective walls he had constructed over years of isolation had begun to crumble. Maybe I was tired of standing aside, he finally said. Or maybe some things are worth fighting for even when the odds are long. The Lord works in mysterious ways. Pastor Holloway smiled. Go now, and God be with you. Nathan slipped out into the gathering darkness, the precious documents secured inside his coat. As he mounted his horse and turned toward home, he couldn't shake the feeling that events were accelerating toward a confrontation none of them might be prepared for. Rebecca sat on the porch of the cabin, watching the stars emerge in the deepening twilight. The vastness of the Wyoming sky still astonished her, so different from the limited views of city life, where buildings and smoke obscured the heavens. Inside, Margaret was preparing supper, humming softly as she worked. The domestic sounds were oddly comforting, creating an illusion of normalcy in a situation that was anything but normal. 3 days had passed since their rehearsal of the sister deception, and with each passing hour, Rebecca found herself settling more comfortably into the role, not just as a performance for others, but as a genuine exploration of who she might become in this new life. The physical work of the ranch, tending the vegetable garden, helping with the horses, learning to cook and clean, had awakened something in her that years of finishing school and society functions had suppressed. Here her worth was measured by what she could do, not by her family name or marriageable prospects. It was liberating and terrifying in equal measure. The sound of approaching hoofbeats jolted her from her reflections. Rebecca tensed, ready to retreat inside if the visitor proved to be Hamilton or his men. But as the rider drew closer, she recognized Nathan's familiar silhouette against the darkening sky. Relief flooded through her, followed immediately by concern as she noted the urgency in his posture. Something had happened. Margaret, she called through the open door. Nathan's back. By the time Nathan reached the cabin and dismounted, both women were waiting on the porch, their expressions reflecting their shared anxiety. What is it? Margaret asked as he climbed the steps. You look troubled. Pastor Holloway found something, Nathan replied, producing the rolled documents from inside his coat. Information about your mother's land in Colorado, Rebecca, and about her death. Rebecca's heart quickened. Tell me. They moved inside where Nathan spread the documents on the table. As Rebecca and Margaret lit additional lamps to illuminate the yellowed papers, Nathan explained what the pastor had discovered. The coal deposits, the marriage settlement protecting Elizabeth's property, and the suspicions surrounding her death. Rebecca listened with growing shock and vindication. I knew it, she whispered, tracing her finger along the marriage settlement that guaranteed her inheritance. I knew Mother would never have surrendered her family's land, and I knew she didn't take her own life. This changes everything, Margaret observed, studying the geological survey report. Your father and Huntington aren't just arranging a politically advantageous marriage, they're trying to gain control of an incredibly valuable resource. Coal to fuel the railroads, Nathan added. The very railroads Huntington is building westward. It's all connected. Rebecca felt a complex mix of emotions, grief for her mother, rage at her father's betrayal, and a fierce determination to reclaim what was rightfully hers. These documents prove the land is mine. My father has no right to transfer it to Huntington or anyone else. Yes, but proving that in court would require revealing your identity and location, Margaret pointed out pragmatically. We need leverage, a way to use this information without exposing you to immediate danger. Nathan nodded in agreement. We need time to develop a strategy. Meanwhile, Hamilton is asking specific questions about the ranch. Pastor Holloway believes they're planning something. A search. Rebecca guessed, her stomach tightening with anxiety. Possibly, or worse. Nathan's expression was grim. If your father was willing to murder your mother over this land, Rebecca, he won't hesitate to take extreme measures against anyone who stands in his way. The implications hung heavy in the air. Their charade as a normal family might protect them from casual inquiries, but it wouldn't withstand a determined investigation backed by Huntington's political influence and Caldwell's wealth. We should leave, Rebecca said suddenly. Tonight. I've put you both in terrible danger and I can't— No, Margaret interrupted firmly. Running now would only confirm their suspicions. We stick to our plan, maintain our story, and use these documents to build our defense. Margaret's right, Nathan agreed. Pastor Holloway is making copies of the most important papers. If anything happens to these originals, the copies will be safe with trusted friends of his in Denver. Rebecca looked between them, overwhelmed by their steadfast support. Why are you both willing to risk so much for me? You barely know me. Nathan and Margaret exchanged a glance, something unspoken passing between them. We know enough, Nathan said simply. We know you're fighting for your freedom and your mother's legacy. That's worth standing for. Margaret reached across the table to take Rebecca's hand. And perhaps in helping you, we're also helping ourselves. None of us came to this moment without scars, Rebecca. By standing together, maybe we all find healing. Rebecca felt tears stinging her eyes at the simple truth of Margaret's words. These two people, strangers just days ago, had become her allies, her friends, her family of choice, in a way her blood relations had never been. So what do we do now? She asked, wiping away a tear. We prepare, Nathan answered, his voice steady and resolute. We secure the documents, maintain our story, and get ready for whatever comes next. And we pray, Margaret added quietly, for wisdom, for protection, and for justice. As they worked late into the night organizing the documents and discussing potential strategies, Rebecca found herself drawing strength from the quiet competence of her companions. Whatever happened next, she would not face it alone. Outside, the vast Wyoming sky continued its eternal wheel stars blazing in cold fire above the small cabin where three unlikely allies prepared to confront powers far greater than themselves. The next morning dawned clear and bright, with no hint of the storm gathering on the horizon. Nathan rose early, as was his habit, and set about his chores while Margaret prepared breakfast. Rebecca joined them shortly after having slept fitfully, her dreams haunted by images of her mother and fragments of childhood memories now cast in sinister light. I've been thinking, she said as they sat down to eat. These documents prove the land is mine, but we need more than proof of ownership. We need evidence connecting my father to my mother's death. Nathan nodded, impressed by her clarity of thought, despite the emotional revelations of the previous night. Pastor Holloway's contact in St. Louis might help, but gathering that kind of evidence from here would be difficult. Unless, Margaret began, then paused, considering her next words carefully, unless we could somehow get Huntington or Hamilton to incriminate themselves. Both Nathan and Rebecca turned to her with questioning looks. What exactly are you suggesting? Nathan asked. A trap, Margaret explained, her practical mind already formulating a plan. If they believe Rebecca is here and that she has the land deeds, they might reveal more than they intend in their eagerness to recover them. Rebecca leaned forward, intrigued despite her anxiety. How would we accomplish that? We let rumors spread, carefully controlled rumors, that a young woman matching Amelia Caldwell's description was seen near Horizon Ranch carrying important documents. Margaret's eyes gleamed with strategic intelligence. The bait would be too tempting for them to ignore. It's risky, Nathan cautioned. If they come in force, we'd be outnumbered. Not if we choose the time and place of the confrontation, Margaret countered. And not if we have witnesses, reliable witnesses, who can testify to whatever is said. The three discussed the possibilities, refining Margaret's suggestion into a workable plan. Pastor Holloway would be their primary ally, along with several respected ranchers from the area who had no love for Dixon or his railroad schemes. The trap would be set, carefully designed to extract admissions without endangering Rebecca. Their planning was interrupted by the distant sound of approaching riders, several of them moving at a deliberate pace toward the ranch. Nathan moved swiftly to the window, his expression hardening as he surveyed the approaching party. Hamilton, he confirmed, with the sheriff and 4 other men. Dixon's with them, too. Rebecca felt her heart race with fear, but forced herself to remain calm. This is it, then. Our performance begins. Remember your story, Margaret said, squeezing her hand reassuringly. You're Rebecca Winters, my widowed sister from Cincinnati. You know nothing of Amelia Caldwell or Colorado land. I'll handle the sheriff, Nathan added, checking that the precious documents were securely hidden beneath the loose floorboard in Rebecca's room. Just stay calm and let me do the talking when possible. They had barely composed themselves when the riders reached the yard. Nathan stepped onto the porch, his stance relaxed but watchful. Margaret and Rebecca remained just inside the doorway, presenting a picture of domestic tranquility interrupted. Sheriff Tanner, a stocky man with a graying mustache and weary eyes, dismounted first. "Morning, Morgan," he called, his tone neutral but official. "Need to have a word with you and the ladies." "Sheriff," Nathan acknowledged with a nod. "What brings you all out here?" Wesley Hamilton dismounted next, his cold eyes immediately scanning the porch and cabin interior, searching for any sign of Amelia Caldwell. Dixon remained on horseback, a triumphant smirk playing at the corners of his mouth. "Morgan," the sheriff began formally, "we've received information suggesting you might be harboring a fugitive, a young woman named Amelia Caldwell, who's wanted for theft in St. Louis." "Theft?" Nathan raised an eyebrow, his expression one of mild surprise. "That's a serious accusation." "Very serious," Hamilton interjected smoothly. "Miss Caldwell absconded with valuable property documents belonging to her father. Mr. Caldwell is most anxious for her safe return and the recovery of his property." The sheriff looked uncomfortable, suggesting he wasn't entirely convinced of the legitimacy of the charges. "Mr. Morgan, I have no personal stake in this matter, but these gentlemen have presented official documents requesting our cooperation. I'm obliged to investigate." "Of course, Sheriff," Nathan replied reasonably. "Happy to help clear up any misunderstandings. What would you like to know?" "First, I'd like to speak with the ladies of the house." Sheriff Tanner said, his gaze moving to Margaret and Rebecca standing in the doorway. "Mrs. Morgan, Mrs. Winters, if you wouldn't mind." Margaret stepped forward, the perfect picture of a respectable frontier wife. "Sheriff Tanner, gentlemen, how may we assist you?" Hamilton studied Rebecca intently, his eyes narrowing as he took in her appearance. The simple dress, the practical braid, the work-roughened hands. If he recognized her beneath the transformation, he gave no immediate sign. "Mrs. Winters," the sheriff addressed Rebecca directly, "I understand you arrived recently from Cincinnati. Is that correct?" Rebecca adopted the slightly downcast gaze they had practiced, her voice modulated to reflect the appropriate mix of respect and grief. "Yes, Sheriff. After my sister's marriage was confirmed, I decided to join her here. There was little left for me in Ohio after my husband's passing." "And when exactly did you arrive?" 3 days after Margaret," she replied truthfully. "The journey was difficult, but worth it to be reunited with my only family." Hamilton stepped closer, his scrutiny intensifying. "You seem remarkably well adjusted to frontier life for a city woman so recently arrived, Mrs. Winters." Rebecca met his gaze briefly before looking away as a modest widow would. "Necessity is a powerful teacher, Mr. Hamilton, and I was not raised to shy away from hard work." "Indeed," his tone suggested skepticism. "Your accent is quite refined for a music teacher from Ohio." Margaret smoothly intercepted the implied accusation. "Our mother insisted on proper elocution for both her daughters, regardless of our circumstances. She believed education was the one thing that couldn't be taken from us." The sheriff cleared his throat, yet clearly uncomfortable with Hamilton's aggressive questioning. "Mrs. Winters, have you encountered a young woman named Amelia Caldwell during your journey west or since your arrival?" "No, Sheriff," Rebecca answered honestly, for she had indeed never encountered Amelia Caldwell. She had been Amelia Caldwell. "The name is unfamiliar to me." Dixon, still mounted on his horse, called out impatiently, "This is a waste of time, Sheriff. We should search the property. If Morgan has nothing to hide, he won't object." Nathan's expression hardened slightly. "Do you have a warrant, Sheriff?" Sheriff Tanner hesitated. "No formal warrant, Morgan." just a request for cooperation in an ongoing investigation. Then I do object, Nathan stated firmly, not because I have anything to hide, but because I respect the law, including the law that protects citizens from unreasonable searches. Hamilton's mask of civility slipped slightly, revealing the cold calculation beneath. Your reluctance suggests guilt, Mr. Morgan. If you're innocent, why not allow us to verify that fact and be on our way? Because my home and my family's privacy deserve respect, Nathan replied evenly. If you want to search my property, come back with a proper warrant. The standoff stretched taut between them, neither side willing to back down. Finally, the sheriff broke the tension. That's his right, gentlemen. Without a warrant, we can't insist. He turned to Nathan with a warning look. But I advise you to consider carefully, Morgan. If it's later discovered you've been harboring a fugitive, the consequences would be severe. I understand the law, Sheriff, Nathan acknowledged, and I respect your position. If you obtain a proper warrant, I'll comply fully. Until then, I'd appreciate it if you'd respect my family's privacy. Dixon's face darkened with frustration, but Hamilton maintained his cold composure. Very well, Mr. Morgan. We'll return with the necessary documentation. His gaze shifted to Rebecca, lingering with unsettling intensity. I look forward to continuing our conversation, Mrs. Winters. As the men remounted and prepared to depart, Hamilton added one final barb. Sheriff, you might be interested to know that Senator Huntington will be arriving tomorrow to personally oversee this matter. He has a particular interest in seeing justice served. The implied threat that Huntington's political influence would override local legal niceties hung in the air as the group rode away, leaving Nathan, Margaret, and Rebecca standing in tense silence on the porch. Only when the riders had disappeared over the rise did Rebecca release the breath she'd been holding. They'll be back, she said quietly, with a warrant or something that passes for one. Hamilton suspects, Margaret agreed. He didn't recognize you outright, but he's suspicious. Nathan nodded grimly. And with Huntington arriving tomorrow, our time is running short. We need to accelerate our plan. They moved inside, closing the door against the dust kicked up by the departing riders and the fear that had followed in their wake. The sheriff seemed uncomfortable with the whole situation, Margaret observed. He might be a potential ally if presented with the truth about the land deeds. Possibly, Nathan agreed. But with Huntington's influence, even a decent man like Tanner might find his hands tied. Rebecca paced the small cabin, her mind racing. Hamilton will report his suspicions to Huntington. They'll return with overwhelming force enough to search every inch of the property and intimidate anyone who stands in their way. Then we don't wait for them to return, Nathan decided. We take the fight to them. Margaret and Rebecca looked at him questioningly. Tomorrow before Huntington arrives, we go into Miller's Creek, he explained. We bring the original documents and Pastor Holloway as a witness. We file a formal claim with the land office regarding the Colorado property establishing Rebecca's legal ownership based on her mother's marriage settlement. But that would mean revealing my identity, Rebecca protested. They'd arrest me immediately. Not if we time it carefully, Margaret countered, understanding Nathan's strategy. The land office opens before the bank. If we arrive early, file the claim, and have Pastor Holloway immediately send telegrams to the territorial governor and federal land office notifying them of the disputed ownership, it creates a legal obstacle that even Huntington can't easily overcome. It's risky, Nathan acknowledged, but less risky than waiting for them to descend on the ranch with a force we can't oppose. Rebecca considered the plan, weighing the dangers against the potential advantages. And what about my father's accusations of theft? They could still arrest me on those charges. The documents prove you didn't steal anything. The land was legally yours all along, Nathan pointed out. As for the rest, it becomes your word against theirs. But with the property claim officially filed and telegrams sent, they can't simply make you disappear. The strategy was bold but logical. By taking the initiative, they would force Huntington and Hamilton to operate in the open under official scrutiny rather than in the isolated confines of Horizon Ranch. There's one more thing we should consider, Margaret added thoughtfully. If Huntington is arriving tomorrow, tonight might be our best opportunity to gather evidence about your mother's death. Hamilton and Dixon will be preoccupied with preparations for the senator's arrival. What are you suggesting? Rebecca asked. That we use our original plan, the rumor of important documents at the ranch, but accelerate the timeline. Tonight, we make sure Hamilton and Dixon believe you're here alone with valuable evidence. When they come, we'll be ready with witnesses hidden to hear whatever they might reveal in their confidence. Nathan looked at Margaret with new appreciation for her strategic mind. It's dangerous, he cautioned. If they come with the intent to silence Rebecca rather than just recover documents, we'll be prepared for that too, Margaret assured him. Pastor Holloway can bring several trusted men from town, those who oppose Dixon's railroad schemes and have no love for outside interference. Rebecca felt a mix of fear and resolve as she considered their options. The path ahead was fraught with danger, but for the first time since fleeing St. Louis, she had hope not just of escape, but of justice. I agree to both plans, she decided. Tonight we set the trap for Hamilton and Dixon. Tomorrow we file my claim at the land office. As they worked through the details of their strategy, Rebecca found herself drawing strength from the unwavering support of these two remarkable people who had become her unlikely champions. Whatever happened in the coming hours, they would face it together, a family forged not by blood, but by choice and shared purpose. Outside, the wind shifted, bringing with it the scent of distant rain. A storm was brewing on the horizon, both literally and figuratively, as the three conspirators prepared to confront the powerful men who had underestimated their determination and resourcefulness. As dusk settled over Horizon Ranch, the trap was set. Pastor Holloway had arrived with three trusted allies ranchers who, like Nathan, had resisted Dixon's attempts to buy their land for the railroad. They were positioned strategically around the property, hidden, but within earshot of the cabin. Inside, Rebecca waited alone, a single lamp burning in the window as a beacon. Nathan and Margaret had departed ostensibly for Miller's Creek, loudly informing Rebecca that they would return by morning. Information that Dixon's spy in town would surely report. The cabin had been carefully prepared. Selected documents, copies rather than originals, were spread across the table, their contents visible to anyone peering through the windows. Rebecca moved about the cabin in a manner calculated to suggest she was organizing important papers, occasionally holding pages up to the lamplight, as if studying them closely. It was theater designed to convince any watching eyes that Amelia Caldwell was indeed at the ranch and in possession of valuable documents. The hours crept by with excruciating slowness. Rebecca maintained her performance, though her nerves grew increasingly taut with each passing minute. Outside, darkness had fully descended the night sky, obscured by gathering clouds that promised rain by morning. Just when she was beginning to think their plan had failed, she heard the soft crunch of footsteps approaching the cabin. Not from the main trail, but from the back, where the trees provided cover for anyone wishing to approach unseen. Rebecca's heart pounded in her chest, but she forced herself to continue her movements naturally, giving no indication that she had detected the intruders. She picked up another document, pretending to study it intently, while straining her ears to track the approaching footsteps. There were at least two people moving with deliberate stealth toward the rear window of the cabin. Rebecca positioned herself to be visible through that window, her back partially turned as she leaned over the table. A floorboard creaked near the back door. Not one of the intruders, but Pastor Holloway's shifting position in his hiding place inside the small pantry. Rebecca froze momentarily, then forced herself to continue her performance, praying the sound hadn't alerted whoever was approaching. The soft click of a gun being cocked sent ice through her veins. This was no mere reconnaissance mission. The intruders were armed and prepared for violence. Through the corner of her eye, Rebecca caught movement at the window, a shadow darker than the surrounding night peering into the cabin. She deliberately turned toward the table, picking up the most prominently displayed document, a copy of her mother's marriage settlement, and holding it up to the light as if examining it carefully. The back door burst open with sudden violence, the wood splintering around the lock as two figures forced their way inside. Rebecca spun around, her rehearsed shock and fear now entirely genuine, as she found herself facing Wesley Hamilton and Samuel Dixon, both men holding revolvers pointed directly at her. "Miss Caldwell," Hamilton's cold voice cut through the silence. "How convenient to find you alone with exactly what we've been seeking." Rebecca backed against the table, letting the documents scatter behind her in apparent panic. "Who are you? What do you want?" "Please, Miss Caldwell," Dixon sneered, approaching with his gun trained on her chest. "The charade is over. We know exactly who you are." "My name is Rebecca Winters," she insisted, maintaining their planned deception even as fear threatened to overwhelm her. "I don't know any Caldwell." Hamilton moved closer, his expression triumphant. Your disguise was clever, I'll grant you that. The practical dress, the work-roughened hands, you almost had me fooled this morning. But your eyes, Miss Caldwell, your eyes are unmistakable. You're making a mistake, Rebecca persisted, watching Dixon gather the scattered papers from the table. Those are my personal documents. These, Dixon interrupted, holding up the marriage settlement, are worth millions. Coal deposits oil potential, the key to controlling the entire Western Railroad expansion. And rightfully the property of Edward Caldwell, Hamilton added smoothly. Your father has been most distressed by your theft and disappearance, Amelia. Rebecca abandoned the pretense, her fear giving way to righteous anger. That land belonged to my mother, not my father. He has no right to sell it to Huntington or anyone else. Ah, so you do know about the arrangement with the senator? Hamilton smiled coldly. I wondered how much you had discovered before your impulsive departure. I know enough, Rebecca retorted. I know my mother was investigating the coal deposits on her family's land shortly before her death, a death that was far too convenient for my father and Senator Huntington. A flicker of something surprise, perhaps, or concern crossed Hamilton's face. You should be careful with such accusations, Miss Caldwell. They could be considered slanderous. It's not slander if it's true, Rebecca countered, gaining confidence despite the gun still pointed at her. My mother didn't commit suicide. She was murdered because she discovered what my father and Huntington were planning. Dixon looked nervously at Hamilton. We should take her and the documents now. The senator will want to handle this personally when he arrives tomorrow. Indeed, Hamilton agreed, his eyes never leaving Rebecca. Miss Caldwell, you'll be coming with us. Your father is most anxious for your return to St. Louis. To face what fate? Rebecca demanded. The same as my mother's, a convenient suicide once the land transfer is complete. Hamilton's composure slipped momentarily, anger flashing across his features. Your mother made the mistake of threatening Edward's business interests. She became problematic. The doctor was most understanding about the gradual addition of arsenic to her medicine. After all, nervous women often take their own lives when their minds become unstable. The confession spoken so casually struck Rebecca like a physical blow. Her suspicions confirmed in the most horrible way possible, she felt a wave of grief and rage so powerful it momentarily robbed her of speech. Dixon, who had been gathering the documents, looked up sharply. Hamilton, watch what you're saying. It hardly matters what she knows now, Dixon, Hamilton replied dismissively. Miss Caldwell won't be in a position to share that information with anyone. The senator has a carefully prepared room waiting for her at his Denver residence, a place where disturbed young women can be treated for their unfortunate mental conditions. Indefinitely. Rebecca's blood ran cold at the implied threat. They didn't intend to kill her, at least not immediately. They planned something potentially worse: imprisonment, disguised as medical treatment, her freedom and credibility stripped away under the guise of mental instability. My father approved this, she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Your father, Hamilton said with cold precision, cares only for the expansion of his business empire. The Caldwell-Huntington alliance represents the future of railroad development in the West. Your cooperation or lack thereof is irrelevant to that greater purpose. And my mother's murder, was that also for the greater purpose? Elizabeth became a liability when she discovered the true value of her family's land and threatened to maintain independent control of it. Hamilton's admission was chillingly matter-of-fact. The senator could not allow such a valuable asset to remain outside their joint control. Your father understood the necessity. Rebecca fought to maintain her composure, though her entire body trembled with the effort. She needed to keep them talking, to extract as much information as possible for the hidden witnesses to hear. And the marriage arrangement, was that also my father's idea or Huntington's? A mutual recognition of convenience, Hamilton replied. The senator needs the land rights secured before certain geological reports become public knowledge. Your father needs the political influence that comes with being the senator's father-in-law. Dixon, growing increasingly nervous, interrupted. Enough talk. We need to get her and these documents back to town before Morgan returns. Hamilton nodded in agreement. Quite right. Miss Caldwell, you will come with us quietly. Any resistance will only make your situation more uncomfortable. You won't get away with this, Rebecca said, summoning all her courage. Nathan Morgan and his wife know who I am. They have copies of those documents safely stored with multiple allies. If anything happens to me, they'll ensure the truth becomes public. A flash of uncertainty crossed Hamilton's face, quickly replaced by cold determination. A problem easily solved. Accidents are common on frontier ranches. A fire, perhaps. Tragic but not suspicious. 3 bodies too badly burned for easy identification. "You're planning to murder them too," Rebecca gasped, genuine horror in her voice. "Regrettable but necessary," Hamilton confirmed without a trace of remorse. "The senator's investment in this railroad venture is too significant to allow interference from a stubborn rancher and his mail-order bride." "You're monsters," Rebecca whispered. "All of you, my father Huntington, you, destroying lives for profit and power." "The march of progress requires sacrifice," Hamilton replied philosophically. "Your mother understood that too late. Don't make the same mistake." He gestured with his gun toward the door. "Now, Miss Caldwell will be departing. The documents are secured and you will be delivered to the senator's custody tomorrow. By the time Morgan and his wife return, we'll have men in place to ensure they meet with an unfortunate accident." Rebecca opened her mouth to respond, but before she could speak, the cabin door crashed open. Nathan stood in the doorway, rifle raised, and aimed directly at Hamilton. "That's quite enough," he said, his voice deadly calm. "Lower your weapons, gentlemen, slowly." Hamilton and Dixon froze, caught completely off guard by Nathan's sudden appearance. From the pantry, Pastor Holloway emerged, his own shotgun trained on Dixon. Through the windows, Rebecca could see other men, Nathan's rancher allies, surrounding the cabin, all armed and ready. "This is a private matter, Morgan." Hamilton attempted his gun, still pointed at Rebecca. "A family dispute that doesn't concern you." "I heard enough to be very concerned," Nathan replied, not lowering his rifle. "Conspiracy to commit murder tends to interest me, especially when I'm one of the intended victims." Dixon, always the coward, immediately lowered his weapon. "This was Hamilton's idea," he blurted. "I was just following instructions from the senator." "Shut up, you fool," Hamilton hissed, his composure finally cracking. "Weapons down," Nathan repeated, taking a step forward. "Now." For a tense moment, Rebecca thought Hamilton might actually fire. His finger tightened on the trigger as cold calculation played across his features. Then, recognizing the futility of his position, he slowly lowered his gun. "A temporary setback," he said with chilling confidence. "You have no idea the forces aligned against you, Morgan. The senator arrives tomorrow. Do you think your local sheriff will stand against a man with Huntington's political connections?" "Perhaps not," Pastor Holloway interjected, emerging fully from his hiding place. "But I imagine the territorial governor might take an interest in a murder conspiracy involving a U.S. senator, especially when multiple witnesses have heard the details directly from the senator's own agent." Hamilton's face drained of color as he realized the full extent of the trap he had fallen into. His confession about Elizabeth Caldwell's murder, the planned accidents for Nathan and Margaret, the details of the land scheme, all had been witnessed by multiple respected citizens. "You planned this," he said to Rebecca, rage and grudging respect mingling in his voice. "You wanted me to confess." "I wanted the truth," Rebecca replied, her voice steady despite her still trembling hands. "For my mother, for myself, for all the others you and men like you have destroyed in your pursuit of wealth and power." Nathan moved forward, collecting the weapons from Hamilton and Dixon, while Pastor Holloway and the other ranchers secured them with rope. Outside, the distant rumble of thunder announced the approaching storm, a fitting accompaniment to the dramatic confrontation. "What happens now?" Rebecca asked, the adrenaline that had sustained her beginning to ebb, leaving her lightheaded and exhausted. "Now," Nathan said, his eyes meeting hers with quiet strength, "we put your plan into action. Tomorrow morning we file your claim at the land office with these men as witnesses to both your identity and Hamilton's confession. And tonight," Pastor Holloway added, "I'll send telegrams to the territorial governor and federal marshals reporting the conspiracy we've uncovered. By the time Senator Huntington arrives tomorrow, he'll find a reception quite different from what he anticipated." As the ranchers led Hamilton and Dixon outside to horses waiting to transport them to the Millers Creek jail, Rebecca remained in the cabin, overcome by the enormity of what had just transpired. The truth about her mother's death confirmed by Hamilton's own admission. The plot against her own life and freedom. The breathtaking evil of men who viewed human lives as mere obstacles to their ambitions. Nathan returned after ensuring the prisoners were securely on their way to town. He found Rebecca standing by the table, staring at the scattered documents that had served as bait in their trap. "Are you all right?" he asked gently. "I don't know," she answered truthfully. "I suspected what happened to my mother, but hearing him confess so coldly, so casually—" Her voice broke. "My own father approved her murder, Nathan. What kind of monster does that make him?" Nathan moved closer, his presence solid and reassuring. "The kind that will face justice now, thanks to your courage." "Will he, though?" Doubt clouded her voice. "Men like my father and Huntington have wealth-influence connections. They might escape the consequences of their actions." "Perhaps," Nathan acknowledged, "but their plans have been exposed. The land they coveted will remain in your control, and they'll know that you, a woman they underestimated and dismissed, was their undoing." Rebecca managed a small smile at that thought. "There is some satisfaction in that, isn't it there?" The cabin door opened as Margaret rushed in, her expression a mix of relief and concern. She had been stationed in town ready to alert the sheriff if anything went wrong with their plan. "I just passed the prisoners on the road," she explained breathlessly. "Pastor Holloway told me what happened." She moved immediately to Rebecca, embracing her without hesitation. "You were so brave." Rebecca returned the embrace, drawing comfort from this woman who had become more of a sister to her in days than her blood relations had been in a lifetime. "It's not over yet," she reminded them as they separated. "Tomorrow we still have to file the claim before Huntington arrives." "We will," Nathan assured her. "Together." As Margaret began preparing a late supper, the three discussed the details of the next morning's plan. The rain that had been threatening all evening finally arrived, drumming on the cabin roof as they talked. The sound was somehow comforting, nature's rhythm, continuing, despite the human dramas unfolding beneath its indifferent gaze. Later, as Rebecca prepared for bed in her small room, she found herself reflecting on the strange journey that had brought her to this moment. She had fled St. Louis seeking escape and freedom with no clear plan beyond removing herself from her father's control. Instead, she had found something far more precious: the truth about her mother's death, the means to reclaim her inheritance, and most unexpectedly, two people who had risked everything to stand beside her, whatever challenges tomorrow might bring. With Huntington's arrival, Rebecca knew she would face them with newfound strength, not just her own courage, but the combined resolve of the unlikely family she had found on the Wyoming frontier. Outside, the storm continued its cleansing passage across the land, washing away dust and bringing the promise of new growth. Inside, Rebecca Caldwell, no longer hiding behind an alias but embracing her true identity and purpose, slept more peacefully than she had in years, her mother's locket clasped firmly in her hand. Dawn broke over Horizon Ranch with golden light spilling across the dew-dampened grass. The storm had passed during the night, leaving behind a washed-clean world and a sky of perfect blue. Under different circumstances, it would have been a morning to savor the kind of pristine Wyoming day that had first captured Nathan's heart a decade earlier. Instead, the three occupants of the small cabin prepared themselves for battle, not with guns or physical force, but with documents, testimony, and the weight of truth against powerful men accustomed to bending that truth to their will. Rebecca stood before the small mirror in her room, studying her reflection. She had abandoned the simple dress and braid of Rebecca Winters, choosing instead to reclaim something of Amelia Caldwell's appearance. Her auburn hair was arranged in a more sophisticated style, and she wore the best dress Margaret could provide, altered quickly the night before to better fit her taller frame. The transformation was subtle but significant. Today she would not hide behind an assumed identity. Today she would stand as herself, Amelia Rebecca Caldwell, to claim her rightful inheritance and seek justice for her mother. The silver locket containing her mother's ashes hung at her throat, a tangible connection to the woman whose murder had been so coldly confessed by Hamilton the night before. Rebecca touched it gently, drawing strength from the small weight against her skin. "I'll finish what you started, Mother," she whispered to the empty room. "I promise." In the main room of the cabin, Nathan and Margaret were gathering the critical documents: the marriage settlement that protected Elizabeth Caldwell's property rights, the geological surveys confirming the coal deposits, and most damning of all, a signed statement from Pastor Holloway and the other witnesses detailing Hamilton's confession regarding Elizabeth's murder and the planned accidents for Nathan and Margaret. "The stage to Denver leaves at noon," Nathan was saying as Rebecca entered. If necessary, you could be on it with these documents while we remain to deal with Huntington. Rebecca shook her head firmly. I'm not running, not anymore. Everything I've learned these past days has shown me that running only postpones the inevitable confrontation. Rebecca's right, Margaret agreed, arranging the papers in a leather portfolio. We're stronger together, and her presence is essential for filing the claim at the land office. Nathan studied both women, concern evident in his eyes. Huntington won't take this lightly. Once he discovers Hamilton and Dixon have been arrested and their confessions witnessed, he'll become desperate. Desperate men are dangerous. So are desperate women, Rebecca replied with quiet determination. I've been underestimated my entire life, Nathan. By my father, by Huntington, by society itself. Perhaps it's time they discovered their mistake. A knock at the door interrupted their conversation. Pastor Holloway stood on the porch, his expression grave. Good morning, he greeted them. I've come with news from town. They invited him inside where he accepted a cup of coffee from Margaret before delivering his update. Hamilton and Dixon are securely held at the sheriff's office, he began. Sheriff Tanner was skeptical at first, but when multiple respected ranchers testified to hearing Hamilton's confession, he had no choice but to hold them for investigation. And the telegrams, Nathan asked? Sent last night to the territorial governor and federal marshal's office in Denver. I received confirmation this morning that both were delivered. The pastor hesitated. However, there's more. Senator Huntington arrived by private coach shortly after midnight. He's currently at the hotel meeting with several local businessmen. Rebecca felt her stomach tighten with anxiety. Sooner than expected. Indeed, Pastor Holloway agreed. And that's not all. Another gentleman arrived with him, a distinguished-looking man with silver hair and expensive clothes. From the description, I believe it may be your father, Rebecca. The news struck Rebecca like a physical blow. Edward Caldwell here in Wyoming. She had prepared herself to face Huntington, but the prospect of confronting her father, the man who had arranged her mother's murder, sent a wave of nausea through her. Are you certain? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The description matches, Pastor Holloway replied gently. And it would make sense. With Hamilton arrested and the plan compromised, Huntington would have summoned your father immediately. Nathan placed a supportive hand on Rebecca's shoulder. This changes nothing. We proceed as planned to the land office first, then the sheriff to formalize the statements against Hamilton and Dixon. Rebecca nodded, drawing a deep breath to steady herself. You're right. My father's presence makes this more difficult emotionally, but legally, our position remains strong. There's one more thing you should know, Pastor Holloway added. Dixon's position as bank president gives him significant influence in Miller's Creek. Several of his allies were arguing for his release this morning, claiming the charges are fabricated. Do they have support? Margaret asked pragmatically. Some, but the ranchers who witnessed Hamilton's confession are respected members of the community. Their testimony carries weight. The pastor stroked his beard thoughtfully. Still, we should expect resistance. Huntington's wealth and your father's influence can sway many who might otherwise stand for justice. Nathan checked his pocket watch. The land office opens in an hour. We should leave now to be first in line. As they prepared to depart, Rebecca felt a curious calm settle over her. After days of hiding and fear, there was something liberating about moving toward confrontation rather than away from it. Whatever happened in Miller's Creek today, she would face it standing tall, secure in the knowledge that truth and right were on her side. They rode together in Nathan's wagon, Rebecca, Nathan, Margaret, and Pastor Holloway. The precious documents secured in the leather portfolio clutched tightly in Rebecca's hands. The morning air was crisp and clean after the night's rain, the rutted road to town gradually drying under the bright spring sunshine. Whatever happens, Rebecca said as the outskirts of Miller's Creek came into view, I want you both to know how grateful I am. You took in a stranger, risked everything to protect me, and stood by me when you could have turned away. Some things are worth standing for, Nathan replied simply. Margaret reached across to squeeze Rebecca's hand. We're family now, she said with quiet conviction. Not by blood, but by choice, and that's a stronger bond than many born of blood. Pastor Holloway smiled approvingly at the exchange. The Lord works in mysterious ways, he observed, bringing together three souls from different paths to create something stronger than any could be alone. As they entered Miller's Creek, Rebecca couldn't help but notice how the townsfolk stopped to stare at their passage. Word of Hamilton and Dixon's arrest had clearly spread, creating an atmosphere of tense anticipation. Outside the sheriff's office, a small crowd had gathered, their expressions ranging from curiosity to outright hostility. Nathan guided the wagon past this scene toward the land office, a small building near the center of town that housed both the territorial land records and the local telegraph office. As Pastor Holloway had predicted, they were the first to arrive, the office not yet open for the day's business. While they waited, Rebecca rehearsed in her mind the statement she would make to establish her claim. She needed to be clear, confident, and precise, leaving no room for legal maneuvering by Huntington or her father. At precisely 8 o'clock, Mr. Perkins, the elderly land agent, arrived to unlock the office. He seemed surprised to find customers waiting so early, but greeted them politely. "Good morning, folks. What brings you to the land office today?" Pastor Holloway stepped forward, having agreed to make the initial introduction. "Mr. Perkins, we need to file an important claim regarding property in Colorado Territory. This young lady is Miss Amelia Caldwell of St. Louis, daughter of Elizabeth Harrington Caldwell, and she wishes to assert her legal rights to land currently being disputed." Mr. Perkins blinked in surprise at the name Caldwell, clearly recognizing it from the recent commotion in town. "I see," he said cautiously. "Well, you'd better come inside and we'll see what can be done." Inside the small office, Rebecca presented her documentation while Nathan and Margaret stood supportively beside her. She explained the situation clearly: her mother's ownership of the Colorado land, the marriage settlement protecting those property rights, her father's illegal attempt to transfer the land to Senator Huntington, and her flight from St. Louis to prevent the fraudulent transaction. Mr. Perkins examined the documents with careful attention, particularly the marriage settlement. "This appears to be in order," he admitted. "According to these terms, the Colorado property should indeed have passed directly to you upon your mother's death, Miss Caldwell." "Exactly," Rebecca confirmed. "I'm formally requesting that you record my claim to this property based on these documents, and that you notify the Colorado Territorial Land Office of this claim immediately by telegraph." The land agent hesitated, clearly uncomfortable with the high-stakes nature of the transaction. "This is rather unusual. Normally, such a dispute would be handled by the courts in the jurisdiction where the property is located." "Under ordinary circumstances, yes," Pastor Holloway agreed. "But there are extraordinary factors at play here, including criminal actions intended to deprive Miss Caldwell of her rightful inheritance." "Criminal actions?" Mr. Perkins looked alarmed. "Wesley Hamilton, my father's assistant, confessed last night to arranging my mother's murder to prevent her from maintaining control of this property." Rebecca stated, her voice steady despite the painful subject. "That confession was witnessed by Pastor Holloway and 3 respected ranchers from this community." Mr. Perkins paled visibly. "Murder, good heavens." "Hamilton and Dixon are currently being held by Sheriff Tanner," Nathan added. "But Senator Huntington has arrived in town, and we have reason to believe he will attempt to suppress this information and force through the fraudulent land transfer." The land agent looked increasingly distressed, caught between his duty to properly record legitimate claims and his fear of crossing powerful men like Huntington and Edward Caldwell. "Mr. Perkins," Rebecca said, gently recognizing his dilemma, "I understand this puts you in a difficult position, but I'm asking you to simply follow the law. These documents clearly establish my legal right to this property. All I'm requesting is that you record that fact and notify the Colorado authorities." After a moment's hesitation, Mr. Perkins squared his shoulders and nodded. "You're right, Miss Caldwell. Whatever powerful interests may be involved, my duty is to the law, not to wealth or influence." With that declaration, he began the formal process of recording Rebecca's claim. The sense of relief that washed over her was profound, the first official acknowledgement of her rights after so many days of uncertainty and fear. While Mr. Perkins prepared the necessary paperwork, Pastor Holloway drafted a telegraph message to the Colorado Land Office, succinctly explaining the situation and referencing the supporting documents that would follow by mail. As they worked, the sounds of increased activity filtered in from the street, voices raised in argument, the clatter of horses and wagons, a general sense of agitation spreading through the small town. Nathan moved to the window, peering cautiously through the dusty glass. "Crowds growing outside the sheriff's office," he reported, "and there's a group of well-dressed men heading this way. Huntington's at the front with an older gentleman beside him who matches the description of your father, Rebecca." Rebecca felt her heart race, but she forced herself to remain calm. "How much longer, Mr. Perkins?" "Almost finished, Miss Caldwell. Just need your signature on these 3 forms, and then I'll stamp them with the official seal." She signed quickly but carefully, ensuring each signature was legible and matched across all documents. Margaret stood close beside her, a steady presence offering silent support. Pastor Holloway joined Nathan at the window. "They're definitely coming here," he confirmed in a low voice. "6 men in total, Huntington, who I presume is Edward Caldwell, and 4 others who appear to be associates or security." Mr. Perkins applied the official seal to the final document just as heavy footsteps sounded on the wooden boardwalk outside. "There," he said, handing a copy to Rebecca. "Your claim is now officially recorded in this office and will be communicated to the Colorado Territorial Authorities." The door to the land office burst open without ceremony. Senator Walter Huntington strode in first, his commanding presence filling the small space. Behind him came a distinguished-looking man with silver hair and cold gray eyes that immediately fixed on Rebecca with a mixture of anger and calculation. Edward Caldwell, her father, the man who had ordered her mother's death. Rebecca felt a tremor pass through her body, but she straightened her spine and met his gaze directly, refusing to show fear or submission. "Amelia!" Edward Caldwell's voice was controlled, betraying nothing of the fury evident in his eyes. "This foolish game has gone on long enough. It's time to return home." "I am home, Father," Rebecca replied steadily. "Or at least I'm where I choose to be. My days of following your dictates are over." Huntington stepped forward, his politician's smile firmly in place despite the tension crackling in the air. "Miss Caldwell, whatever grievances you may have with your father, this is hardly the appropriate venue to address them. Family matters should be handled privately, not paraded before strangers. This ceased to be a private family matter when my father conspired with you to steal my inheritance and arrange my mother's murder," Rebecca stated clearly, her voice carrying to every corner of the small office. A shocked murmur ran through the men who had accompanied Huntington and her father. Edward Caldwell's face hardened, but he maintained his composure. "My daughter is clearly distraught," he said to the room at large. "She's been making these wild accusations since her mother's tragic suicide, a manifestation of grief, her doctors assure me." "These are not wild accusations," Pastor Holloway interjected firmly. "Wesley Hamilton confessed last night to arranging Elizabeth Caldwell's murder on your instructions, Mr. Caldwell. That confession was witnessed by myself and 3 other citizens of this community." "Preposterous," Huntington dismissed with a wave of his hand. "Hamilton is a loyal employee who was simply attempting to return a runaway daughter to her father's protection. Any so-called confession was clearly coerced." "The land claim has been filed and recorded," Nathan stated, moving to stand protectively beside Rebecca. "Miss Caldwell's legal right to the Colorado property has been established through proper documentation. Whatever you gentlemen came here to prevent has already been accomplished." Edward Caldwell's mask of civility slipped, slightly revealing the cold calculation beneath. "Mr. Morgan, is it I understand you've been harboring my daughter, interfering in matters that don't concern you. Such actions could have serious consequences for a man in your position." "Are you threatening me, Mr. Caldwell?" Nathan asked quietly. "Merely stating a fact. A struggling rancher opposing men of our resources and connections is unwise." Margaret stepped forward, her quiet dignity a stark contrast to the aggressive posturing of the wealthy men. "Your daughter came to us seeking protection from forced marriage and theft of her inheritance. We provided that protection as any decent people would." Edward studied Margaret with dismissive contempt. "And you are Margaret Morgan, Nathan's wife and Rebecca's friend." "Rebecca," Edward raised an eyebrow, glancing at his daughter. "I prefer my middle name," Rebecca stated firmly. "Amelia was your choice, not mine. Just as Huntington was your choice for my husband, not mine." A tense silence fell over the room, broken only when Mr. Perkins cleared his throat nervously. "Gentlemen, the land office is now officially open for business. Unless you have legitimate claims to file, I must ask that you continue this discussion elsewhere." Huntington turned his attention to the land agent, his expression hardening. "Mr. Perkins, I strongly advise you to reconsider recording this fraudulent claim. The political and economic ramifications could be severe for this community if you proceed." Before Mr. Perkins could respond, the door opened again, admitting Sheriff Tanner. The lawman surveyed the tense scene with practiced neutrality. "Morning, folks," he said mildly. Seems we have quite a gathering here. Sheriff Huntington greeted him with forced cordiality. I was just about to seek you out. There appears to be a misunderstanding regarding two of my associates currently being held in your jail. No misunderstanding, Senator, Sheriff Tanner replied firmly. Mr. Hamilton and Mr. Dixon are being held on serious charges, conspiracy breaking and entering attempted kidnapping, and most seriously, confession to murder and conspiracy to commit additional murders. Edward Caldwell's face remained impassive, but Rebecca noticed a slight twitch in his left eye, a tell she remembered from childhood that indicated he was not as controlled as he appeared. These charges are absurd, Huntington declared. Based on what evidence? The sworn statements of 4 witnesses who heard Hamilton's confession, plus physical evidence from the break-in at Morgan's ranch. The sheriff's gaze moved to Rebecca. Miss Caldwell, I'll need your formal statement as well as the intended victim of the kidnapping and conspiracy. Of course, Sheriff, Rebecca agreed. I'm prepared to provide that statement immediately. Edward Caldwell stepped forward, his voice taking on the authoritative tone that had intimidated Rebecca throughout her childhood. Sheriff Tanner, my daughter is not well. She has been in a fragile mental state since her mother's death 2 years ago. Any statement she provides would be questionable at best. I'm perfectly sane, Sheriff, Rebecca countered calmly. And I have documentation to prove that my mother's death was not suicide but murder arranged by my father and Senator Huntington to gain control of valuable coal deposits on land that rightfully belonged to me. Sheriff Tanner's eyes widened slightly at the directness of the accusation. That's a serious charge, Miss Caldwell. With serious evidence to support it, Pastor Holloway added, holding up the portfolio containing copies of their documentation, including Hamilton's confession that the murder was accomplished through gradual arsenic poisoning disguised as medication for Elizabeth Caldwell's nervous condition. A ripple of shock passed through the onlookers. Even in the hardened frontier town of Miller's Creek, the cold-blooded murder of a wife by her husband was considered beyond the pale. Huntington, sensing the shift in the room's atmosphere, attempted to regain control of the situation. Sheriff, these wild accusations are designed to distract from the simple fact that Miss Caldwell fled her home, taking valuable property documents that belonged to her father. We merely seek their return and her safe escort home. The documents in question establish my legal right to land that was my mother's inheritance, Rebecca countered. Land that my father and Senator Huntington conspired to steal through an arranged marriage after eliminating my mother when she discovered their scheme. The confrontation might have escalated further had not a commotion from the street drawn everyone's attention. A rider had arrived in town moving at a hard gallop that spoke of urgent news. The man dismounted directly in front of the land office and burst through the door, breathing heavily from his journey. Sheriff Tanner, he gasped. Telegram for you from the territorial governor. The sheriff took the offered paper, unfolding it with deliberate care as all eyes in the room fixed upon him. He read slowly, his weathered face revealing nothing until he reached the end of the message. Well, he said, finally looking up to address the room, this changes matters considerably. He turned to Huntington and Edward Caldwell. The governor has ordered me to maintain custody of Hamilton and Dixon pending the arrival of federal marshals. Furthermore, he instructs me to secure all documents related to the Colorado land dispute and ensure the safety of Miss Amelia Caldwell until the investigation is complete. Huntington's politician's mask slipped, revealing raw anger beneath. This is outrageous. The governor has no jurisdiction over a private business matter. Murder and conspiracy aren't private business matters, Senator, Sheriff Tanner replied evenly. They're federal crimes when they cross territorial boundaries. And according to this telegram, the governor has been in contact with the authorities in St. Louis regarding the suspicious circumstances of Elizabeth Caldwell's death. It seems Miss Caldwell wasn't the only one with questions about her mother's suicide. Edward Caldwell remained silent, his cold eyes calculating, even as the situation deteriorated around him. Rebecca recognized that look. Her father was already formulating contingency plans, seeking leverage and escape routes. Sheriff, he finally spoke, his voice smooth and reasonable. Surely you recognize the delicacy of this situation. My daughter's mental health, the commercial implications of these disputed land claims, the reputational damage to all involved, these are matters best resolved privately, not through heavy-handed legal interventions. What my father means, Rebecca translated coldly, is that he would prefer to handle this through bribery and threats, rather than justice. Edward's gaze snapped to her genuine surprise registering on his features. This confident, outspoken woman was nearly unrecognizable as the dutiful daughter he had controlled for so many years. "You've changed, Amelia," he observed, studying her as if seeing her for the first time. "Yes," she agreed simply. "I have." Sheriff Tanner cleared his throat. "Mr. Caldwell, Senator Huntington, in light of the governor's instructions and the serious nature of the charges, I must ask you both to remain in Miller's Creek until the federal marshals arrive. You are not under arrest at this time, but I cannot permit you to leave the jurisdiction." Huntington bristled visibly. "I am a United States Senator Sheriff. You have no authority to detain me." "I have the authority to investigate murder and conspiracy within my jurisdiction, Senator," Tanner replied, unmoved by the display of indignation. "And I have direct orders from the territorial governor. You're welcome to telegraph Washington to protest, but until I receive contrary instructions from my superiors, you will remain in Miller's Creek." The standoff stretched taut between them, neither man willing to back down. Finally, Huntington gave a curt nod. "Very well. We will remain at the hotel while this misunderstanding is resolved. But be assured, Sheriff, there will be consequences for this overreach." As Huntington and Edward Caldwell prepared to depart, Rebecca stepped forward, addressing her father directly. "Why did you do it?" She asked the question that had haunted her since learning the truth about her mother's death. "Was land and money worth more to you than your wife's life, than your daughter's happiness?" Edward regarded her with cold detachment. "You never understood business, Amelia. Sentiment is a luxury successful men cannot afford. Your mother became an obstacle to progress. You became a means to an end. That's simply the reality of our world." "No," Rebecca replied firmly. "That's the reality of your world. One you created through choices to value wealth over family power over love. I choose a different reality." For a moment, something flickered in Edward Caldwell's eyes, perhaps regret or simply irritation at being challenged. Then it was gone, replaced by the same calculating coldness that had defined him throughout Rebecca's life. "We'll see how long your principles last when faced with the harsh realities of life without wealth and position," he said dismissively. "This frontier infatuation will pass, and you'll realize what you've thrown away." With that parting prediction, he turned and followed Huntington from the land office, their entourage of associates trailing behind them. In the sudden quiet of their departure, Rebecca felt a wave of emotion threatening to overwhelm her. Relief, vindication, grief, and a strange sense of finality. The confrontation she had both dreaded and needed was over, leaving her drained but oddly liberated. Nathan placed a steadying hand on her shoulder. "You did well," he said simply. Margaret nodded in agreement. "Very well indeed." Sheriff Tanner approached his expression serious but respectful. "Miss Caldwell, I'll need your formal statement about everything that's happened from St. Louis to last night's events at the ranch. When you're ready, of course." "I'm ready now, Sheriff," Rebecca replied, straightening her shoulders. "The sooner the truth is fully documented, the better." As they prepared to move to the sheriff's office, Mr. Perkins called after them. "Miss Caldwell, the telegraph operator, has confirmed receipt of our message to the Colorado Land Office. Your claim has been officially registered there as well." Rebecca thanked him sincerely, recognizing the courage it had taken for the mild-mannered land agent to stand firm against the pressure from Huntington and her father. Outside, the streets of Miller's Creek buzzed with activity as news of the morning's confrontation spread through the small community. People gathered in small groups discussing the shocking developments with animated gestures and expressions. The dramatic clash between powerful outsiders and local residents had provided more excitement than the frontier town had seen in years. At the sheriff's office, Rebecca provided a detailed statement of everything that had transpired: her discovery of the planned transfer of her mother's land, her flight from St. Louis, her arrival at Nathan's ranch during the storm, Hamilton and Dixon's break-in and confession, and finally the confrontation with her father and Huntington at the land office. Sheriff Tanner recorded it all with professional thoroughness, asking clarifying questions, but offering no judgment or opinion. When she had finished, he reviewed the statement with her before having her sign the official document. "What happens now?" Rebecca asked as she set down the pen. "Federal marshals should arrive within 2 days," the sheriff explained. "They'll take custody of Hamilton and Dixon for transport to the territorial capital for formal charges. As for your father and the senator," he shrugged slightly, That depends on what evidence can be gathered regarding your mother's death and the land conspiracy. Will they escape justice? The question had been haunting Rebecca since the confrontation in the land office. Sheriff Tanner considered his response carefully. Justice takes many forms, Miss Caldwell. Men like your father and Huntington are skilled at avoiding legal consequences. They have money, influence, connections. But you've already achieved a significant victory by preventing their scheme and reclaiming your inheritance. It's not enough, Rebecca said softly. Not for what they did to my mother. I understand, the sheriff nodded sympathetically. And I promise you I'll do everything in my power to ensure the investigation is thorough. But I also advise you to prepare yourself for the possibility that full justice as you envision it may remain elusive. It was not what Rebecca wanted to hear, but she appreciated his honesty. The harsh reality was that men of her father's wealth and Huntington's political power often operated beyond the reach of conventional justice. Nathan, who had been quietly supportive throughout the statement process, spoke up. The important thing is that you've stopped them, Rebecca. The land is secured in your name. Your mother's legacy is protected, and their scheme has been exposed, which may prevent them from victimizing others in the future. Nathan's right, Margaret added gently. Sometimes winning means surviving with your principles intact, even when perfect justice isn't possible. Rebecca nodded, recognizing the wisdom in their perspective. She had entered this confrontation seeking both her inheritance and justice for her mother. She might have to be content with achieving only the first goal completely. As they left the sheriff's office, Pastor Holloway was waiting outside to escort them back to the wagon. The town is in quite an uproar, he observed. News travels fast in small communities. Is it safe to return to the ranch? Margaret asked practically. Huntington and Edward Caldwell may be restricted to town, but they could still send others to cause trouble. I've arranged for several of our rancher friends to keep watch on the roads, Pastor Holloway assured them. And Sheriff Tanner has deputized 2 men specifically to patrol the area around Horizon Ranch until the federal marshals arrive. Rebecca felt a wave of gratitude for the community that had rallied around them, people who had never met her before a few days ago, but were willing to stand against powerful outsiders to protect one of their own, because somehow improbably she had become one of them. The ride back to Horizon Ranch was subdued, each of them processing the morning's events in their own way. The confrontation had been intense but successful beyond their realistic expectations. The governor's intervention, the formal recording of Rebecca's land, claimed the containment of Huntington and Edward Caldwell in Miller's Creek all represented victories they had scarcely dared to hope for. Yet Rebecca's emotions remained complex and turbulent. The direct encounter with her father had reopened wounds she had thought long scarred over. His cold dismissal of her mother's murder as a business necessity had revealed a moral emptiness that both horrified and saddened her. Whatever fragile hope she might have harbored for some remnant of humanity in Edward Caldwell had been extinguished by that conversation. As they approached the ranch, the familiar silhouette of the cabin against the wide Wyoming sky brought an unexpected sense of homecoming. This place, which had been merely a refuge a week ago, had somehow become more. The land, the small house, the distant mountains, they spoke to something in Rebecca's soul that years of city living had never touched. Nathan helped both women down from the wagon before leading the horses toward the barn. Rebecca and Margaret walked together to the cabin, united by the shared experience of the morning's confrontation. You were magnificent, Margaret said as they reached the porch. Standing up to your father that way, refusing to be intimidated, it was truly remarkable. Rebecca smiled faintly. I surprised myself. All those years living under his roof, I never once directly challenged him. Yet today, the words came easily. Because you were speaking truth, Margaret observed wisely, and because you've found your own strength these past days. Inside the cabin, the familiar surroundings seemed to embrace Rebecca with a sense of safety she had rarely experienced. The simple furniture, the lingering scent of coffee and wood smoke, the small touches that made the space a home, welcomed her back from battle. What will you do now? Margaret asked as they removed their coats. With your land claim secured and the truth about your mother's death exposed, your immediate goals have been accomplished. The question caught Rebecca by surprise. She had been so focused on the immediate challenges that she had given little thought to what might come after. I don't know, she admitted. I suppose I should travel to Denver eventually to see the land that was so important to my mother. Beyond that, she trailed off uncertain. You're welcome to stay here as long as you wish, Margaret offered sincerely. We've grown quite fond of having you with us. The simple kindness of the offer brought tears to Rebecca's eyes. Thank you, she whispered. That means more than I can express. When Nathan joined them a short time later, the three sat together at the table where they had planned their strategy just the night before. Now, with the immediate crisis past, they found themselves in the strange aftermath of victory, relieved, exhausted, and facing an uncertain future. The federal marshals should arrive by day after tomorrow, Nathan said, accepting a cup of coffee from Margaret. Once they take Hamilton and Dixon into custody, the formal investigation will begin. Sheriff Tanner believes they'll want detailed statements from all of us. And my father and Huntington, Rebecca asked. Legally, their position is precarious but not hopeless, Nathan admitted reluctantly. Hamilton's confession implicates them, but without corroborating evidence from St. Louis regarding your mother's death, they might avoid the most serious charges. Rebecca nodded, having expected as much. They'll use every resource at their disposal to discredit Hamilton, to claim he acted alone or fabricated their involvement. Most likely, Nathan agreed. But even if they escape full legal justice, their scheme has failed. The land is secure in your name, and their reputations will be tarnished by the investigation, regardless of the outcome. Small consolation for my mother's murder, Rebecca said softly. A contemplative silence fell over the table, each lost in their own thoughts about justice, consequence, and the limits of human systems to right profound wrongs. I've been thinking, Margaret said finally, about what happens after the marshals complete their investigation. About your future, Rebecca. Rebecca looked up curious. What about it? You mentioned wanting to see your mother's land in Colorado. That's a journey that would benefit from companions, especially given the likelihood that your father and Huntington still have associates who might wish to interfere. Nathan raised an eyebrow, catching the direction of Margaret's thoughts. Are you suggesting what I think you're suggesting? Margaret nodded, her practical nature asserting itself. We could all travel to Colorado together, help Rebecca establish her claim in person, ensure her safety during the transition. She hesitated briefly, and perhaps consider our own future there as well. Our future? Nathan repeated, clearly surprised by this turn in the conversation. Dixon won't abandon his efforts to acquire your ranch, Nathan, Margaret pointed out reasonably. Even with the current legal troubles, he'll eventually return to his schemes. The railroad will still need water for steam engines, and your spring remains valuable. Rebecca watched the exchange with growing interest, sensing that Margaret had been considering this possibility for some time. You're suggesting we sell the ranch and move to Colorado? Nathan asked, the idea clearly both unsettling and intriguing to him. I'm suggesting we consider all options, Margaret clarified. Your skill in developing land would be just as valuable in Colorado as here, and Rebecca will need trustworthy partners to help manage what appears to be a significant property with valuable resources. Rebecca leaned forward, suddenly engaged by the possibility. A partnership, she said thoughtfully. The three of us working together to develop the land properly, ethically, the way my mother would have wanted. Nathan looked between the two women, his expression thoughtful. I've spent 10 years building this ranch from nothing, he said slowly. It wasn't just land to me, it was proof that I could create something lasting, something worthwhile. And you have, Rebecca assured him earnestly, but perhaps that was just the beginning of what you were meant to build. A knock at the door interrupted their conversation. Through the window, they could see one of Sheriff Tanner's deputies standing on the porch, his expression suggesting urgency. Nathan opened the door, greeting the young man with a questioning look. Mr. Morgan, the deputy began without preamble. Sheriff Tanner sent me to warn you. Edward Caldwell and Senator Huntington have left Miller's Creek despite the sheriff's instructions to remain. Left, Rebecca stood quickly. How? When? About an hour ago, and the deputy explained. They claimed to be taking a short ride to discuss business matters privately, but they never returned. Sheriff found their hotel rooms empty, personal belongings gone. They're running, Nathan concluded grimly, abandoning Hamilton and Dixon to face charges alone. Sheriff thinks they're headed for the territorial border, the deputy confirmed. He's organized a pursuit, but they had a significant head start. Rebecca felt a complex mix of emotions at this news: disappointment that her father might escape justice, yet relief that the immediate threat of his presence was removed. What about Hamilton and Dixon? Still secure in jail, and the deputy assured her, and the land claim is still legally filed and recognized. Sheriff wanted you to know that part hasn't changed. After the deputy departed, promising to return with any updates, the three sat in silence, absorbing this unexpected development. They're cutting their losses, Nathan finally observed, abandoning the Colorado scheme rather than facing potential murder charges. My father always had contingency plans, Rebecca said quietly. He never committed fully to any venture without preparing escape routes. This is typical of him, actually. Does it change anything for us? Margaret asked practically. Rebecca considered the question. Not fundamentally. The land is still secured in my name. The investigation into my mother's death will continue, though, without my father present to face charges if evidence is found. In our discussion about Colorado, Nathan prompted, surprising both women with his continued interest in the idea. I meant what I said, Rebecca affirmed. I would welcome you both as partners in developing my mother's land. Your knowledge, your integrity, your vision for creating something meaningful, these are exactly what the property needs. Margaret smiled at the enthusiasm in Rebecca's voice. It would be a new beginning for all of us. Nathan rose and moved to the window, gazing out at the land he had nurtured for a decade. His expression was contemplative rather than reluctant. 10 years ago, I came here with nothing but determination and a dream of building something that was entirely my own, he said softly. This land gave me purpose when I needed it most. He turned back to face them. But perhaps the purpose wasn't the land itself, but what it taught me about perseverance, about growth, about creating something valuable from raw potential. Those lessons would serve you equally well in Colorado, Margaret observed. Nathan nodded slowly. They would. He looked directly at Rebecca. Your mother's land, what do you envision for it? Rebecca hadn't fully formed her answer to that question, but as Nathan asked it, a vision began to crystallize in her mind. Not just a coal mine or railroad stop, she said with growing certainty. Something sustainable, something that honors the land while using its resources wisely. A place where people could build lives with dignity, where the wealth extracted from the earth benefits those who work it, not just distant investors. A community, Margaret suggested, built on principles different from those your father and Huntington represent. Exactly, Rebecca agreed, warming to the concept. My mother loved that land because it had been in her family for generations. She wouldn't want it exploited and discarded. She'd want it cherished, developed responsibly, left better than it was found. Nathan's expression softened as he listened to her vision. That's something I could commit to building, he said quietly. Something worth starting over for. The three fell silent, the possibility of this new shared future hanging in the air between them. It was not a decision to be made lightly or in the immediate aftermath of crisis, but the seed had been planted, taking root in fertile ground. Outside, the sun began its westward descent, casting long shadows across Horizon Ranch. Within the cabin, three people whose lives had been unexpectedly intertwined by circumstance contemplated the prospect of choosing to remain connected by purpose and shared vision. 2 months later, a wagon train departed Miller's Creek, heading south toward Colorado territory. At its center was a large freehite wagon carrying building supplies, seed for planting, and carefully packed household goods. Three figures rode alongside a tall man with watchful eyes constantly scanning the horizon, a practical woman whose quiet competence had earned the respect of everyone in the traveling party, and a younger woman with auburn hair and determined green eyes, a silver locket gleaming at her throat. Nathan, Margaret, and Rebecca had made their decision deliberately after the federal marshals had completed their initial investigation. Hamilton had maintained his confession, providing detailed testimony about Elizabeth Caldwell's murder and the conspiracy to control the Colorado land. Dixon, seeing which way the wind was blowing, had turned state's evidence, offering information in exchange for leniency. Edward Caldwell and Senator Huntington remained beyond immediate reach, having fled to Europe, according to the latest reports. Warrants had been issued for their arrest, but no one harbored illusions about the likelihood of their return to face justice. Their reputations, however, had suffered irreparable damage. Huntington's political career was effectively over, and Edward Caldwell's business associates were rapidly distancing themselves from the tainted Caldwell name. The sale of Horizon Ranch had proceeded smoothly, with 4 neighboring ranchers combining resources to purchase the property at a fair price. The underground spring would benefit the entire community rather than fueling Dixon's railroad ambitions. As the wagon train crested a rise, Rebecca urged her horse forward to ride beside Nathan and Margaret. Behind them, Miller's Creek had disappeared from view, and ahead stretched the vast landscape leading toward Colorado and their shared future. Any regrets? She asked, studying Nathan's profile as he gazed toward the southern horizon. He considered the question seriously before answering. Not regrets. Appreciation for what was, anticipation for what will be. Margaret nodded in agreement. The ranch served its purpose in your life, Nathan. It gave you roots when you needed them. Now it's time to spread branches. Rebecca smiled at the apt metaphor. In the 2 months since the confrontation with her father, she had watched Nathan and Margaret's relationship deepen from pragmatic partnership to genuine affection. Their marriage, begun as a practical arrangement, was blossoming into something neither had anticipated, but both clearly cherished. And her own place in this unconventional family had solidified as well, not as an outsider or temporary guest, but as an integral part of their shared enterprise. The three of them had drafted formal partnership agreements for the development of the Colorado property, ensuring that each had defined roles and interests in the venture. I received a letter from my mother's friend in Denver, Rebecca mentioned as they rode. She's eager to meet us and has already begun introducing our development plans to potential investors who share our vision for responsible resource management. And the legal proceedings, Margaret inquired. Continuing in our absence, Rebecca confirmed. Pastor Holloway promised to forward any significant developments. But with the land securely in my name and the warrants issued for my father and Huntington, our presence isn't required for the process to move forward. They rode in comfortable silence for a time, each contemplating the journey ahead, not just the physical distance to Colorado, but the greater journey of creating something meaningful from the legacy Elizabeth Caldwell had left her daughter. I've been thinking about names, Rebecca said eventually, for our development, something that honors the past while looking toward the future. What did you have in mind? Nathan asked. Horizon Haven, she suggested, to acknowledge where this partnership began and what we hope to create. Margaret smiled approvingly. A place of new beginnings built on the foundation of what came before. I think it's perfect. Nathan nodded his agreement, his eyes scanning the distant mountains that marked the pathway to their future. Horizon Haven it is. As the wagon train continued its steady progress southward, Rebecca touched the silver locket containing her mother's ashes. Soon those ashes would rest on the land Elizabeth had loved in the community that would rise as a testament to her legacy. It wasn't perfect justice for what had been done to her, but it was perhaps something more meaningful, a transformation of tragedy into hope, of loss into creation. Rebecca glanced at her companion's Nathan with his quiet strength and unwavering integrity. Margaret with her practical wisdom and surprising depth. Together they had faced powerful adversaries and emerged victorious. Together they would build something lasting from the promise of the frontier that had brought them into each other's lives. Ahead, the horizon stretched endlessly under the vast Wyoming sky, a fitting symbol for the unlimited possibilities awaiting them in Colorado. Behind lay the past with all its pain, loss, and lessons. The present was this moment of transition, of journeying from what had been toward what could be. And the future was theirs to create, one careful step at a time, guided by shared principles and mutual respect rather than greed or ambition. It was a future Elizabeth Caldwell would have approved of, one where her daughter was finally free to choose her own path and build her own legacy. As the sun climbed higher in the sky, illuminating the trail before them, Rebecca felt a profound sense of rightness settle in her heart. For the first time in her life, she was exactly where she was meant to be traveling, exactly the road she was meant to travel, and exactly the company she was meant to keep. The promise of the frontier had been fulfilled in ways none of them could have imagined when their paths first crossed in a storm-lashed cabin just a few short months ago. Now together they rode toward new horizons and new promises waiting to be kept. The end.